So look, just really quick, in case I spontaneously combust, I just want to say really quick for the record that I think Brian Duffield did an amazing job with his directorial debut. Whew. I guess I'm okay. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith. I'm the publisher of Backstory and the host of the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I'm really honored today to have writer-director Brian Duffield for his feature film directorial debut. He's had films that he's written produced, but this is his directorial debut on something that he wrote and is now directed. And Brian did a great job. He made a movie that is just in time for Halloween. It is a lot of fun to watch because there's a lot of gore in it, but it's a comedy, and it's a film that has a heck of a heart. So if you have not yet seen Spontaneous, the subject of today's podcast, Zoomcast, because we are also putting these on YouTube so you could watch them. They're not just in iTunes and Spotify anymore. If you go to Backstory Magazine on YouTube, you'll find it. Spontaneous is what we're going to be talking about all day, and we are going to be talking a lot about it because, as it turns out, as you will hear, Brian was a podcast listener of mine in college. And because of that, he really wanted to give back to fans like him and to just provide the most in-depth interview ever. And that's what we did. We have a huge runtime today and a lot of stuff to get through. So look, we always like to amplify the voices of folks for independent cinema. And I really hope you go see Brian's movie, Spontaneous, and support him. Somebody who was a podcast listener who is now doing a podcast and did a very special one for you. It would be fantastic for you to see Spontaneous. You could rent it anywhere you rent movies online. Brian had a lot of amazing things to say about his directorial debut, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, you know, Backstory Magazine, we're still publishing. In fact, we're just getting ready to publish issue 42, our long-delayed pandemic issue. And we could use all your support as well. It's not easy running a film magazine during these kind of crazy times, but we are going to still do it. We're going to still keep publishing. And if you want to support us by subscribing, you could use coupon code SAVE5, like the number 5, SAVE5, over at backstory.net, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. With your subscription, of course, you get new issues, but you also get access to our archive. And currently, we're getting ready to publish issue 42. We go back to about issue 30 in the archive, and we're continuing to add new older issues as we are simultaneously building new issues. So that is our challenge. If you've never read us before, please test drive us. You could read the free issue over at backstory.net. It works on a desktop or laptop. Or you could read us in our iPad app, which I happen to love our iPad app. And your credentials from backstory.net will actually work on the iPad app if you subscribe at backstory.net. So look, there's a lot of reasons for you to read us. I hope you could find one after test driving us because your support would be appreciated. But now, without any further ado, let's get into our monster podcast with writer-director Brian Duffield to talk about his latest film, Spontaneous. Okay, after technical difficulties, Brian Duffield, how's it going? Good to see you.
Man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. No more questions. This interview's over. Thanks for your time, man. I really appreciate it. Okay, there's so much to start with.
Yeah.
There's so much to start with. Here we go. You went to Temple University.
Yeah.
You got an internship. You went to Oakwoods Apartments in Universal City with all the fresh divorcee tears still on your walls. And you were out here right as the writer's strike started in 2007. Yeah. And what was it like for you to see what your prospects may or may not be right as the writer's strike was starting?
Well, I came out in 2008, so it was right as the writer's strike was ending, but right as the recession was starting.
Right.
So it sucked. It was terrible.
It was a tough time. I mean, at that point, the WGA had tapped into their fund to actually help some writers with their mortgage payments, which is something that the dues have always gone towards. And, you know, it helped some writers. Some writers actually retired kind of or were set into early retirement. What were you doing at your internship during that time? Was development still going on?
Yeah, there was a lot of script reading and that kind of thing. But it was, it was pretty slow, probably not that dissimilar from now. Actually, it's probably slower then than it was now.
Well, right, because writers couldn't actually write during that time.
Yeah, so it was a lot of I remember reading scripts that were set up elsewhere a lot, like kind of like familiarizing the slates of different studios, that kind of thing. Um, and then it ended, and I saw an intern, and so then that kind of picked back up a little bit, yeah. But it not the you do everything right and you get good results that college promises.
Well, here's the thing. You were working as a script reader, and that's actually a really good fundamental task to have completed
Yeah.
as a writer, because you're looking at other people's scripts. You don't want to be too judgmental. You don't want to be terrible to them. But at the same time, it teaches you kind of what works and what doesn't. What were some of the things that you picked up as a script reader?
That a lot of them are terrible, which sounds probably sounds douchey, but I found it really encouraging, in terms of like, having just kind of left Philly and moved out to LA, and then it felt like there was kind of like this you know unbreakable ceiling in terms of like, so few people can become professional writers, and then you kind of read all the scripts that are selling, and a lot of them were bad, and not even just like bad story, like just like, they'd be like full of typos, all the things that you kind of are so anal about not doing, and then you'd be like, oh, the script sold for, at the time, 7 figures was a lot more common, and then you just be like, oh, this is a mess, and then like, they would get replaced, or sometimes not. Like I remember I gave like a really scathing script review on a script that won some Oscars, and I stand by it still.
Do you want to say what script it was?
No.
Well, how about this? Without even giving us a hint of what it was.
It wasn't nominated, so that's
What was it? What was it that you hated the most about it? What was the mistake that you saw?
I thought it was kind of like a top to bottom bad script, where like I didn't buy. It was like a relationship movie, and there was not like a single part where I bought the relationship. And that's kind of the whole game at that point. But I remember being like, oh, I think this is terrible, and then my boss being like, they're making it right now, and I was just like, oh, do they change on? And she was like, no, I don't think so. I was like, that's crazy. And then it won a couple Oscars, I think. And
I had that. I was a reader like during college, and they played that as a trick on me, in which they would give me a couple bad scripts and then one or two that were like actually going into production. And when I like made any criticism about the things that were going into production, they're like, well, this one's going into production, so you're wrong. I'm like, am I though? And like the things that I was pointing out, like in my coverage, ended up to be flaws that by the time the movie came out, they hadn't fixed. So it's funny when they do that to you.
No, yeah, I mean, when even like when on set, like if we have assistants, I always really want them, if they see something that they don't think is good, our assistant Nicole on Spontaneous, I would be like, you have to tell me if you think something's not good, otherwise there's no help to me, like in having like an assistant. And so I think for me it's I remember, the same is true with the bosses I had, where, they were just like, if you feel bad and you're like, it's a, 4 out of 5, but you really think it's a 2 out of 5, that doesn't really serve anyone's best interests. And I can be wrong, but as long as I'm like able to explain why I'm wrong.
It's an interesting thing for filtering notes, though. I mean, at a certain point, especially when you're on set and you're limited on time, how much can you really change at that point? It seems like you need the most important note of what's happening now. And I commend you on that, because being surrounded by yes men is a true danger for anybody, working in film, because, if you're not evaluating your work and you're convinced that everything's perfect, that's a road to disaster as well. But how many changes could you really accept when people are pointing stuff out while you're shooting?
Yeah, it kind of would rotate on the scene. Like there are definitely times when someone would be like, we should get a take like this, and I would just be like, I don't have, like, I would love to, that sounds great, but I don't have the time to do that. And Spontaneous, it was, I did more takes on that than I would probably on another movie, just because it is such a tonal tightrope. And so that was like a real part of it was just making sure, I had like kind of like that spectrum of tones that I could play with in the edit so that I didn't wind up having a scene that was offensive or something just by happenstance of moving too fast and kind of missing some of that tonal stuff. But in general, yeah, there's a lot of times where you're just kind of like, unless you tell me really quickly, in the first take or two, you're kind of sunk. Where it's like
only because we're on it. It's one thing for when writers take notes from friends and other readers, and it sometimes is like murky waters to go through because everybody has an opinion. You could have stuff that's different. There's an old adage, if 7 Russian sailors tell you you're drunk, you might want to sit down and think about it for a minute. So some people collate notes, and when different friends and people in the industry give them the same note over and over that don't even know each other, it's a way of knowing that, there's something wrong with that scene and I got to figure out what's been important for you in taking notes. What's the way that you've gotten through it, if you do take a lot of notes from friends in the screenwriting stage?
On Spontaneous, it was weird because, I personally knew everyone that saw the movie basically until critics started seeing it, because there was no testing or anything like that.
Right. I'm talking the script stage though.
No, yeah. And then on that, I definitely got notes from friends. And I think on Spontaneous more than other things I've done, just because you are killing 40 kids. And so, being the kind of thing like I not wanting to accidentally make a movie that, everyone was going to find in poor taste and offensive. But it's also a very dark comedy. And so I think I was kind of conscientious of that. And would get feedback and I would kind of have like the notes in my head that I was like, okay, if a couple of people bring this up, like that's really good to know. And there wasn't like a consistent note on that one in the script. There was consistent notes in like the film version, but on the script, I kind of remember it being like really spread apart. And then you just had that part of that is just, I've professionally been writing for 10 years. And so, and now having directed, you kind of just have to trust your gut and be like, some people are not going to get their note addressed. And it would also be the kind of thing where like some people's favorite scenes would be like other people's like, you should cut that kind of scene. And then you're just kind of like, it's, the buck stops with you. So you got to make that choice.
You have to go with your instincts. Well, so this is going to make me seem really old here, but I always point this out in an interview when there's somebody like you. You have been a podcast listener of mine since you were in college. So, which is weird because I just graduated college, so I don't even understand how that works. But
you just did one class a year.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's wild. Like at what point when you were kind of somewhere else, like when you were in Philly or when you were in college listening, what were some of the things that you started gleaning from the podcast? Because it's always fun for listeners to see a listener go from being a podcast listener to someone who is in the podcast. I think you were the 22nd or 23rd example of such a person. Okay. So congrats on that. I'd give you a cake if we were in person, but this pandemic is slowing everything down. But what were some of the things that you studied in your early days when you were listening to the podcast to get a grip on screenwriting?
And I know we talked about this before too, but I remember I think part of it was that it kind of demystified the screenwriting side of things. Cause even like that was early days of just podcasts in general.
Yeah.
And so
this is my 15th year of podcasting. I was going to do all these amazing screenings and podcasts this year. And then, other plans happened in 2020.
I know, man. But it was the kind of thing where, before like the podcast, you would get like a couple documentaries maybe. And then like you would get books. And like one or two like magazines and stuff. But then the podcast was, in all honesty, it was the first time I like heard screenwriters that were currently working like talk. And it wasn't just, the like the awardsy guys, you did a great job of having like the full spectrum of genres. And so that was, even just that was really helpful. And then kind of, for the most part, and there are like exceptions, but for the most part, like everyone's kind of entryway into screenwriting, they weren't like LA boys kind of thing. It was a lot of people from like Idaho who moved out to LA and then bus tables for 10 years. And then, so that all that stuff was, that was the most encouraging stuff, where it kind of felt, because even like I remember like growing up, it wasn't necessarily like that, it was an impossible dream, but you kind of tell people you're going to move to LA and try to make movies, and you get a lot of the same kind of like, that's cute kind of reaction. As if it was the same as like being like a football player in the Super Bowl, or, kind of thing. And then I felt like the podcast really made it seem like, it's a career, it's like an attainable, it's a hard career to get, but it's not like the most, Ivy League kind of select few kind of career. And then there was just, and then beyond that, there was just little, I know we talked about the Gagan podcast that you did for Siriana.
No one was privy to that conversation, but yes, you told me that you like the Gagan podcast.
I've known you for 15 years. So
no, I know. The Gagan podcast in particular, like I'm going to try and restore a lot of my old podcasts into some sort of an app or something, so at least they pay for themselves. But it's interesting because we're going to talk about this later. You said that you liked Gagan talking about transitions in that episode, which is something that you did excellently in Spontaneous.
Oh, thank you.
When we're in the spoiler section, I marked one or two of them that we'll talk about. But that was cool.
Like that was like, it was stuff like that where like you're not really finding them in like the screen, like the Save to Cat kind of books, because they're not really the what do you call them? Like the pillars of screenwriting. But then it is the kind of thing like, I remember him explaining it and like how it gives the kind of that momentum to stories. And I was like, oh yeah, like that's really, you kind of do just naturally create like this forward progression, even if nothing is really happening. And so that was something that I've that's always stuck with me and that I've used, obviously until now. Yeah.
Well, I think, one of the things that we always talk about in the podcast is breaking in. And I think it would be good for people to hear just kind of the hoops that you had to leap through. I know that you worked at the Lucky Brand plant in Vernon at one point, right? And like, there's a point at which you're writing and you're also just trying to pay your rent and put the food on the table, and coming as an outsider, as you did, it's still a daunting experience. So what tips would you give to younger writers after the pandemic ends that want to kind of do some of these things that got you through it?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, it wasn't quite overnight, but it was really close to overnight. Because I had been writing scripts, and then an older script was the one that a buddy of mine was playing basketball with now my manager, and gave it to him, and then he read it and called me. I was like, can I rep this? And I was like, yeah, I'm working at a jeans factory. And then like it felt like days later it sold.
This is your bridesmaids a bitch, right?
Yeah, and it was
give us the pitch on that, just for people that know. And this is around 2010 or 2011. Yeah,
it was 10. And I wrote it in 8. But then everyone read it in 10. And it was about a guy who never told his family that his longtime now ex-girlfriend had cheated on him, and winds up going to his sister's wedding where she is a bridesmaid, and kind of has like this awful time trying to keep it together at this wedding, even though he just is kind of about to explode the whole time. And it was, it's a wedding, it's a fun wedding rom-com kind of thing. And that sold to Skydance, I want to say all in the same month of like, I think it was like around like October that I met everyone at Circle of Confusion, their management company, and then the script sold. And I was really overwhelmed by, like, I remember like getting the phone call that it sold because I like went to the bathroom at my job, and then like coming back, and then like, going back to work, and kind of this very strange whiplash of them being like, well, you need to start working kind of on the notes and stuff. And me being like, I have no money. And because you don't get paid fast either. So I mean, Circle of Confusion, I think, floated me money for a couple of months while
really?
like
They gave you advances?
yeah, because like I had because it was
That's
a temp
great.
job. And it was just, yeah, it was really, I found it really hard and really like the first 4 or 5 years of writing, I found really hard and overwhelming. I mean, partially because of some of the crazier experiences, but just also like the whiplash of, because it wasn't that far after the recession either. And so it was the kind of thing of like, I remember like writing like really bad checks to myself for like $10, like putting it in the bank, and then like putting $10 of gas in my car, and then like hoping like by like the end of the day, like I could get like a $10 note from somebody and like put it into the bank. So it was all like,
wow.
Oh, okay. And then it was like, and now you're a professional screenwriter. And so like the whiplash of that I found that really hard to kind of, wrap my head around.
Did you have a moment when you like quit your day job? Did you have one of those kind of moments, or was it gradual?
It was like it ended at Christmas, and then I just never went back. So it wasn't like even like this big dramatic thing. And it was like everyone was so nice at the job. I remember. Excuse me. And like, but it was like this kind of thing where it was like the Christmas break. I left, and I was just like, I'm just not coming back because it was a temp job.
Right.
And then, yeah, I remember just feeling like really kind of overwhelmed for a couple of years. And then, and that was the time, like I started reaching out to like other screenwriters that were kind of having their same kind of introductory moment. And I'm still really close with a lot of them. And that I found that a lot more kind of like grounding, where suddenly it was just like, oh, like I'm not alone in all of this. I reached out to one screenwriter that kind of emerged at the same time as me, and he was a real dick. I remember that, but for the most part, everyone was great.
Why was he a jerk? Well, you don't have to name names, but like he just wasn't supportive.
You could probably absolutely guess who I'm talking about if you had to guess one. But I remember sending out this email, and it was hey, I read your script on the Blacklist. Like, yeah, because I sent out like a dozen of those. It's like people like Arashimel, who's I love, and like Dan Casey, and like Kelly Marcel. I think I met Kelly a little later. And then I wrote this email, and I was like, hey, so I thought your script was great. Like my script was on the Blacklist, which is crazy. I really, I loved your script. Like my script was bought by the guys who just like Skydance had just done True Grit, the Coen's movie, and I was like, it's this new company. They just did True Grit. I remember like the response was, the only thing you wrote back was, I thought True Grit was pretty shit. And I was just like, oh, just for not getting drinks.
That's funny.
But like for the most part, everyone kind of, we got like Scott Frazier. Like there was like that kind of like class of 2010 that I felt like helped kind of ground me.
Well, we're going to get to spontaneous later, but not to traumatize you. 2011 was a good year because you ended up on the Blacklist for Jane Got a Gun. Yeah. And the Blacklist, provided you a lot of opportunities. It's why every issue of Backstory Magazine, we run an entire Blacklist script and interview the writer, and we always pick scripts that have even less of a chance of getting made. Jane Got a Gun got made. And,
somehow.
And it was a difficult, to say the least, experience for you. And it's something that we're going to talk about for a little while, and we're going to ease into spontaneous a little later after this. But like, I think it's a really good lesson for writers to know, in which to encapsulate what happened. You were hired for Jane Got a Gun to become a movie with Natalie Portman and Lynn Ramsey to direct. Yeah, and Lynn Ramsey to direct, and she's an amazing director. Yeah. And for a multitude of reasons, slowly but surely, you found that you were not the sole writer of the movie that you created that ended up on the Blacklist, and you were let go, and Lynn Ramsey left the movie, and
left before that all happened.
Yeah. Lynn Ramsey left the movie before it started production. Yeah. And then 2 other writers ended up with their names on the movie. And it was a tough experience. And I just want to get a couple questions out of the way. Like, first off, how did you find out that you were being let go? Like, how does that news travel?
Because it was like, I think a week into shooting, and
And you met the new director at that point, if it's a week into shooting, right?
Yeah. I met everybody. I didn't meet Ewan McGregor. I think he was the only person. Like, he started much later into the process because Jude dropped out when Lynn left. So Ewan is scot-free. But yeah, I can't remember who it was, but I was like in the production office, like pounding out pages. And this, I can't remember. Maybe it was the AD. I can't remember who it was, but he like came into like the room and like he shut the door and he like sat down. And he was like, because Lynn leaving was really traumatizing. Because we were all on set when it happened. And so we were all kind of like very emotional and rudderless. And I remember him like sitting down and being like, "Hey, like I know things are really tough right now, and you're like a really special and great writer. But some of these new pages, I know you could do a better job." So he's kind of like giving me like this pep talk, and I was like, "Oh shit. Like, yeah, I'm sure I could." And he like handed me like the pages, and they were pages that I didn't write. So that was more or less how I found out that I was about to get canned.
Seeing somebody else's pages.
Well, it was like so funny because I think he was really trying to like be encouraging because the pages were bad. And then the pages,
and he had no idea that they were written by somebody else, which is just crazy.
Yeah, I think my name was on them even, which was extra shitty and illegal.
That is shitty.
But then, and then like I got like sent home like 30 minutes later, I think. Yeah.
That's a mess, and I'm sorry that happened. And it's weird. You've told me before that you've never seen the movie.
Yeah,
right.
I've seen 3 of the movies I have my name on so far.
Okay, well, so will you ever watch it? Do you think there'll ever be a day?
Yeah, like at some point I'll probably watch it. Like it's just, but like it was like for a long time I was like, there's no benefit to me watching this movie. Like I'm just gonna be angry and upset, and it just kind of feels like watching like I don't know what the right analogy.
I've heard a bunch. Somebody running away with your own girlfriend and you're watching the video. Like
yeah. It's like that scene in like Jarhead, when like the soldiers get sent like the sex tape and they're all like cheering, and then the guy realizes it's his wife in the sex tape.
Yes.
It's kind of
that's a great example.
It's probably like that.
I've always wondered because like Tarantino has famously said that he's never watched Natural Born Killers because he was.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was taken off of that, and there's no one else that has a credit. He still is sole credited, I'm pretty sure, but like he just couldn't handle the way that Oliver Stone took it, and he knew. I think he said that he watched the very, very beginning and just had enough of it. And I've always been curious what he would say if he did see it, because I think there could be just a masterclass of commentary. So I don't know. One day, if you want to watch Jane and do live commentary, I would be fascinated to hear.
Yeah, like I thought about doing it for like a charity or something.
I'll do it with you once the pandemic ends.
Oh yeah,
you could do.
It's tough. Part of why it's tough is that everyone else involved is obviously still alive and working, and so it kind of would quickly become
forget them. It's really like a matter. It's Brian. It's only a matter of what happened with the script. Like, who cares about the shots, the direction? Right. Like,
no. Yeah, I don't care about that shit.
Yeah, the lesson is what they did to your script. Well, so you made it through that, and it was tough for you. What kind of happened in the arbitration process? Is there anything you could tell us about that? Because I would assume it went through that.
No, I didn't arbitrate on that one.
You did not? Okay.
No, I just felt like, because I remember they proposed the credit, and I was just kind of like, I don't know if I would have gotten it, but also it was really bad. and I was just like, oh, I don't really want this as like a soul. Like at least I can like point to it and
Right.
be like, this is not, which, like now I was young and dumb then, like I probably would have gone for it now just because of the money that comes with soul credit. But at the time I was just like, and because it was so traumatized, because I was really close with Lynn. And like it was just like everything about the experience was so ugly and nasty that I was just kind of like, I didn't want to be a part of it. And I didn't want to take my name off of it. But it was also the kind of thing like I was just like, I didn't even want to think about like arbitrating and like getting into the weeds about like explaining why.
Well, I know that your next
on other things, but not on that one.
Your next project, when you did the sequel to Divergent, which is Insurgent, I think on that one you had told me that basically from the beginning, before you'd written a word, they told you, don't worry, we're going to hire rewriters. You're going to be one of a team, and so there was no shock there. What was it like getting into a studio franchise, based on an existing book?
Yeah, no, that was nice in terms of, after I got sent home from Jane, there's a real moment where I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this.
Really?
Yeah, because it was so evil. It was just so bad. And I was just kind of like, I don't, maybe I'll write plays or maybe I'll just do something. Like there was a real time where I was just like, I don't know if I just have the strength to do this again. And then they sent me the Insurgent, the sequel. And Neil Berger was doing it, who I hadn't met, but I'd heard really good things. And I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks after I got sent home. And the whole, like Shailene's character, her whole journey in that book is she's like just super depressed. And I really related to it. I remember I went into Lionsgate for my pitch, and because the Jane thing was so, I mean, I still get asked about Jane like every week, but like it was at the time it was like just happened. I don't even know if they were back up to shooting yet. And so like, part of it was like a Q&A about Jane, and then it was like the other half was like this pitch, and I was just like, I relate because I'm really depressed. And then I got hired shortly afterwards. And it was great because like I instantly got flown to Chicago, and I went with Doug and Lucy, or they were already there rather, the producers of it, and Neil was shooting. And the idea was, when I got hired, like the first one was going to come out in March, and they wanted him to be shooting either right before or right after it came out. And so this would have been also like April, May, I want to say. So it was like they were hoping to have like a really fast turnaround. And it was great because I got to like just put all of my energy into this other movie, where Lionsgate and everyone was great. Where, like you said, like I was well aware. They didn't give me like I think they might have said like in November, or you're going to get replaced, like in the pitch. Like that was kind of like the preamble. And I was like, oh, that's great. Like it was like, you kind of like know exactly what cog you are in the wheel. And then I could kind of, it wasn't like a turn your brain off job, because it was really difficult in terms of adapting it. But it was also kind of like, I know exactly my place. I know exactly my purpose. It's an OWA. So it's like, when people are saying like, write this line, you just say, as long as it's,
when you're saying OWA, what do you mean by that?
Oh, like an open writing assignment. So it's like, the producers are, and the studio are like, you were here for this service. It's not, you're fulfilling our vision, as opposed to like the script is my vision. And I found it really therapeutic in like a weird way. Like I was just this cog in the wheel, like, and just making sure I was doing like the best work I could, but also like, you're just, you're just trying to move this giant franchise. along until Akiva, who was the one who came in after me.
What did you learn about the process of adaptation? Because here you're adapting a book, which you also did for Spontaneous. Did you do the thing where you took out the pages and you highlighted things and stuff like that? Or how did you do it?
Yeah, that one was different in terms of it was such a big property and like such a like insanely devoted fan base. Like I remember like when I got the job, I think I got a document from Lionsgate that would basically was like a list of dialogue or list of scenes like from the book, like, and they were just like, these have to be in the adaptation. They were like, we're going to get yelled at if this line that Trish says isn't in the adaptation. So that was kind of different in terms of, it was a lot of it was more
like you had a roadmap basically.
Yeah. And it was funny because then, Neil didn't wind up directing the second one. And then they kind of, I think they wanted to move on from, not move on, but like expand their core audience. And so like the second movie and especially the third movie are like very different from the books. But when I was on the job, it was very much like we need to really honor these books. And so it was nice in terms of it was just kind of trying to figure out like, okay, like how do I condense, this 400-page thing into, 2 hours or something. But it was nice. It was also nice just because like, it was like so many of these scenes were kind of like these unmovable scenes where it was just like, these have to be in the movie. All these lines have to be in the movie. So it was a lot of archaeological kind of work as opposed to like I've never had an adaptation like that where it was just like, oh, I'm going to get like crucified if I change these lines kind of thing.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
That was unique. Yeah.
It was also,
again, I thought it really helpful and therapeutic where I was just like, I'm just trying to get Veronica's book onto the screen.
Well, it also turned into being your first arbitration, which is something that you don't get writers talking about a lot. Often it triggers automatically when there's multiple writers, especially on a studio project. And, the rule of thumb is that each writer has to prove a 30%, 30% of their script survived into the final movie as just the justice, for being able to get a credit on the movie. And it's kind of a strange process in which there's multiple arbitrators that are volunteers through the WGA. They have to collate and read and understand each of the drafts. Each writer gets to have a writer's statement that accompanies their draft that kind of advocates for what they did. And right off the bat, and I know this happens, so we'll talk about it a little. There's lawyers that are guns for hire for up to like 15 to 20 grand to write arbitration statements, which has made the process extremely competitive. And I think getting away from the WGA's intentions of it. What was your experience like on your arbitration? I'm not asking for any bloody news or horrible news, but really just the functionality of it and how you as a young writer navigated through it.
Yeah, I think it was stressful in terms of, and because it's an adaptation, like there's only really so much you can deviate from the book. And so then it gets really into like the nitty gritty of, kind of, especially on that one where, there's some things that are just wholesale. There, a huge chunk of it's wholesale the book, and then there's a chunk of it that it's probably all Mark. Mark Bomback's work, because I think he was the one that was mostly working with that director. And so then it was like when it went to arbitration, it was like that fear of like, oh, I might not get credit, which is really scary, especially because I was first in, but also because there's such a financial, I make pretty good money off of that movie, now.
For the kid that was writing himself fake gasoline checks, that's great, and you deserve to.
Yeah, oh, it's awesome. But it was, it's like that thing where you're like, and every time there's another writer added, to a credit, you're like, oh, that's, I'm getting like a third of the check as if I was a sole credited writer, or whatever that is. But like that was a kind of a scary thing where I was just like, I really would like to have that experience that you go to the premiere and all that kind of stuff, And then also like not wanting to have the experience where like, you know, everyone knew I was writing it and then my name wasn't on it. And then you're kind of explaining to everyone for years, you're like, oh, you know, like I lost arbitration and it sucks. And then, you know, so there's like a pride element in that too. And it worked out. Like we like right at the end, everyone kind of without the arbiters like agreed on like a credit. But it
that happens often where the writers kind of agree amongst themselves if they decide.
Yeah, it started off. Yeah, like it started off with like the credit that was proposed. I can't remember now. I don't want to misspeak about it, but like we were going towards arbitration, and then like I think like on the deadline, it kind of resolved itself. And then, well, no, that's not true. I'm wrong because I remember waiting for the phone call from the Writers Guild, and you know being relieved when I got credit. I think like right at the end we might have all said we were putting in the same statement, but I was worried. And like nothing Akiva or Mark ever did made me think that they were going to be duplicitous. But I was always like, what if it got conned? Where like I'm putting in like a statement where I'm like, we all deserve equal credit, and then like both of them are just like, the two of us deserve equal.
Oh my
credit.
God, yeah, wow, that's crazy.
I mean, that was essentially what the Jane experience was a lot, but like that wasn't what happened. I remember being really nervous for like the 2 or 3 weeks. You know, like every time your phone rings, you're just like, oh, this is the call that's going to tell me if I'm going to make, you know, money this year or not. But
have you used somebody to write your arbitration statement? Have you been part of that game?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but I'm not. I'm.
Everybody's allowed to say, of course.
Yeah.
How's the experience been for you?
Good. I mean, it's, you know, I think it's tough, you know, especially when I was writing for other people, you know, because it's a really stressful and intense process. And, you know, now I think you get 3 days to kind of turn around your statement and, you know.
Wait, why 3 days? That sounds like I don't know. I think I don't know. I think it's. I have to say this like literally every couple years because I know so many writers that have been kind of messed up in the process. I feel that the WGA is wrong to have it be a volunteer process. I feel that there should be a department at the WGA with non-impartial judges that, you know, are arbitrators themselves, and that is their job 365 days a year, so that they could collate 10 to 20 drafts when they come through, rather than expect a working writer, because that's one of the requirements of the volunteers. You have to be a working writer with a credit in the past 3 years. And I think that those writers are usually busy, and they're not going to always do the best service to their co-writers for looking at these scripts. And sometimes they know the writers that are in the arbitration process and don't recuse themselves. So I feel like it's a mess that needs some solving down the road, and not a lot of people are able to say that publicly. But I'm not in the WGA right now, so I could.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to. I don't know what I am and am not allowed to say. Although I think it is not working as well as it could. And I don't think that many people would disagree.
Yeah, and the other thing is there's a series of rules. Sorry to harp on this. There's a series of rules that have changed over the years that the arbitrators don't always follow. One of which applies to you almost on this, because it used to give an absolute preference to the first writer on any project, and it was a preference that was undue because a couple writers figured out that rule. And they would go in whenever they were hired on a pre-existing franchise, like, you know, Divergent, like Insurgent, what you're talking about. And they would use every single character name, location, and everything else from the book, so that they would have it on the checklist that they were the first person to have used those items, and it would give them a little more of an edge for their arbitration. Right. And eventually it was thrown out, because it'd be like if somebody, just go biblical on you, if somebody was adapting the Book of Moses, and they used, all right, we got Pharaoh, we got slaves, we got the parting of the Red Sea. But then that writer also threw in UFOs showing up, a laser battle, and time travelers. They would still, in the old ways, be able to get more for the bang for their buck, even if they turned in the worst script ever and like empirically deserved to be fired. Yeah. And so eventually those rules changed that. But I still talk to writers where they're being graded by the old rules of who adapted which part of the book first.
Yeah.
So it's a crazy process. But all right, I don't want to get too sidelined. Sorry about that.
No.
You know, it is therapeutic for you though, because you've been through multiple arbitrations, and you said that like you've kind of come out and being like an advocate for other writers to call when they're in arbitrations.
Oh,
What are some of
bad
the
experiences? Yeah, I mean, I think
what's some of the advice you give to young writers of things to watch out for when they're doing their first deals that you wish you would have known?
yeah, I mean, I think part of it too, because the Jane experience was so crazy that I feel like it's become like a thing where like, and someone else is going through like a really crazy production experience. I get the call where they're kind of like, use Duffield as your therapist. And a lot of the times it is, like on Jane, like it would have been like, that was like this perfect storm of everything going wrong possible. Where like, I think it's like completely like impossible to like replicate that experience. Excuse me. There we go. But I think, and I was really young. That was my second script sale. And so like, I didn't have a lot of the protections that I would have now.
And what are some of those that you would advise for young writers to have?
So I think gunning for a producer credit is super important, and it usually is a fight until you're kind of a little older. But I think that is like a battle that you can fight and win.
Would that protect you from being fired, would you say? Is that one of the reasons why?
Well, you can get fired, but you can't necessarily get excluded. So then it just can get messier.
It's interesting you say that, because when I did my my podcast for Rise of the Planet of the Apes,
sure,
Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver were the producers, and one of the funniest things they said was they remember firing themselves at least twice, and they brought in some other great writers, but they realized that they had to take themselves out of that part of the loop because of what the director and the studio wanted. But then they still were able to come back by the end of it and rehire themselves and stay involved as a producer with some of the decisions to make sure that it didn't completely go off the rails. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, that would be like a big one that I would probably harp on. I mean, like, I think in general, I mean, the best experiences I've had with other directors was when I had a real say in the matter. And so like the pilot I made for USA a couple of years ago, I hired Matt Shackman to direct it.
That was Olive and
Olive Forever. Yeah.
Olive Forever. That's right.
And that was a great experience. It didn't get picked up, but like the testing was fantastic. And it was also just like, I was like, oh, like I know who the person is that I'm going to get along with, who's going to do a great job, who's, all these different things. And it was like a really healthy, I remember that was like the first time I was on a set where I was just like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like. Like everyone's in a good place. Like everyone's happy. Like we're all getting, it just felt very like, oh, like, yeah, I could make this show for a couple of years because I love all the kids. I loved all the crew.
Well, it was an expensive show. I mean, is it something that could still get picked up, that you could still shop around?
Because it was also a teen show, so everyone's kind of outgrown it now.
But you still have the scripts. You could reboot it with a different cast.
Yeah, I could probably, but I feel like I did it. I feel like
all right, fair enough.
Like Hanukkah, but it was a really. But I mean, for me, that was like, and because obviously in TV you have more power, but I think as a producer, like being able to be like, no, this is like the director that I really believe in and really want. I think a lot of that can be a really that's kind of how you can start having like that healthy process, is like if you're like, oh, you're kind of part of building the team, you're choosing like where the movie winds up in some cases. You can kind of select your players, as it were, and be like, oh, this is an enjoyable experience. Like I know this director loves what I love about the movie, because even Olive was the first time like a director pitched me, and like that was like so I could hear what Matt was saying, that I was just like, oh, everything you are saying is what I want to hear in terms of like what's important to me about this. As opposed to the other things where like other directors were hired and, I had no say in that. And then you kind of, sometimes you show up and you're like, hopefully this isn't awful. But other times they're like, this other thing, like I really love this other movie that I want this movie to become. And then you're like, oh, that's why? Like I know everyone needs to work, but then it becomes like a frustrating experience because you're just automatically everyone's on a different page.
Well, and you're able to protect your vision if you're in the room, obviously.
Yeah.
So that,
and I mean, for me, like I love working with Matt because he added a lot to it, but I was like, he's extremely talented. He's a nice guy. He can articulate why he thinks these changes are better. And so with Matt, I was like, oh, the show is getting better because of Matt, and my vision is expanding because I trust this guy to do great work. And honestly, Lynn Ramsey was really similar, where she was so talented.
She's amazing.
And she would have ideas that were crazy and then would kind of articulate what she wanted. And I was like, oh, like this is better than what I had. Because, as a writer, like I love taking other people's ideas because then I can just take credit for them.
There you go.
But like I remember, like, it's like if it's in the script, like the writers get, blamed good and bad. And so when someone has a good idea or like a better line, I'm all about improving myself. But it's tough then when like the people that you're working with either don't acknowledge that you exist or they just are clearly making a different product, because then there's no real path forward, and you're just kind of like your name is on this thing where you're just kind of like, I don't really know what the hell this is, and it's not really what I want it to be. But I mean, it sounds like a good experience. Another experience where you got to keep your name on it as sole credit was The Babysitter, which I desperately tried to get in the screening series to make your first screening, but we couldn't do, damn it. What was your biggest lesson from The Babysitter working with McG? A biggest lesson, I think there were some things that McG was really smart at and great at. But I think for me, I think at that moment, and it wasn't anything in particular that he did necessarily, but I think like there was a while on that one where I debated whether or not I should direct it. And I decided I wanted to have like one more kind of production experience under my belt, because the ones that I had were, and this was before Olive too. But the ones that I had were so unique and crazy. And that wasn't like a crazy production or anything, but I felt like that was the time that I was like, oh, I'm ready to do this job. Like I second guessed myself out of that job essentially. And it's not like necessarily like a regret, but it was that I remember just thinking a lot that, I had chosen the less exciting and fun job on the movie. And I'm sure I learned things too. But I remember just being like, I should have just, bit the bullet and done it, because, and honestly,
done what? Wait, done what? I'm confused. What you're talking about?
Directed the movie.
Oh, like I should have tried to direct the movie. Got it.
Yeah, because for a while we talked about should I, go out with it as a directing thing or not. And I didn't, and it's not like a regret that I have that I didn't, but I think it was the kind of thing where I remember like being on set and just kind of being like, oh, it looks like McGee's having so much fun. Kind of like, it was just like, you're kind of in that, that he just has, he was directing a movie. And I think I realized quickly into that shoot that I was ready to direct a movie. And so that was kind of what I learned from it, that like after that shoot ended, I mean, I'm still close with Samara and Judah. And a bunch of the crew too. But I remember just thinking, like, I was just like, oh, like I'm not directing this because I was a coward. kind of thing. And then part of it was probably, again, like the recovery from like the crazier experiences that I had. But I remember that was like, I was like, okay, like, I need to really start writing scripts that are for me to direct. Because if I don't, I'm just going to always be a spec writer, which is not what I wanted to be to begin with. And then also it was just that thing of like, how many times can I just not be in the driver's seat of something?
And why would you say that you don't want to be a spec writer? Is it the control issue of not being able to control your voice in directing in your earlier days?
I mean, I think part of it is I've had success for sure, which is great. But it hasn't correlated into like great experiences necessarily.
But you're not saying you want to be an assignment only writer, are you?
No, I think there's a difference though between being like, because I think now I would be like more like a packaged writer director where, I would take something out, to the town. It would have actors and like I'm picking up, writer, director, producer of it. So like that kind of, but like everything up until, like now that I've sent out spec wise, it's just like a script, and like maybe there's like a producer attachment, but like for the most part, it's just like, it's a script. And then like everyone can build the blocks of the movie. And it just wasn't like a great fulfilling experience. And I think part of that was that, you don't get to see, like you get to like start telling the story with the script, but you then have no involvement in, finishing the movie at all. And then it kind of feels, and obviously you never get like a say in this, but it also kind of feels like a little bit of like you abdicate the storytelling where you're kind of like, you started it and then it's not that you got bored because, usually you get shown the door. But it always kind of feels like this, like it feels like you have like all these like incomplete, science experiments littered around, where you're like, other people finish those, but I didn't finish those. And, like it just feels like there's like
well, I think you said it right. Staying on as a package, as a director, like that is your path because then you get to stay the storyteller. So that's the way that you would handle specs, which makes sense. So, we're going to get to spontaneous in a second here, but what is one of the worst notes that you remember getting in development? Just going through the development hell process. The silliest note, I don't need to know who it's coming from, but like just a note where you were just like shell shocked.
That a female character should be raped so that you could understand why she was angry at the bad guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Glad you got away from that one. If there wasn't a pandemic, before I fully understood that you were being written on all these, I was like, this is going to be the greatest year yet ever. I'm going to have not one, I'm going to have 3 Duffield screenings this year. Yeah. Finally, damn it, he's going to be in the series because you had Underwater, which ended up you were rewritten on, and you also had your script Monster Problems, which was a script you wrote, I want to say in 2012, right?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, and that became Love and Monsters, which comes out very soon. And again, you got rewritten on both of those. Yeah, and I guess the question there would be, were there, did you have a better experience in those rewrites where you got to contribute, or was it just another like arbitration and you get to see the film at the very end situation?
Yeah, I arbitrated on one of those, but I won't say which one, and I lost. But
was that an arbitration for sole credit, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other one I didn't. But yeah, no, it was like, because they were both, in terms of my involvement, Monster Problems, I think I was done. I think I got fired on Monster Problems, whatever day. I remember I got fired on it because I had just walked out of Grand Budapest Hotel.
Okay.
I was like super high on Grand Budapest. And then like, I got, this shitty call. So that was, I remember, I don't know how long ago that was. That was like literally my last like involvement of any sort on that. And then on Underwater, they just went through like the normal, process, where everyone was for the most part lovely. It just, the version that the movie that Will wanted to make, which is very different from the spec, in some ways, which is, again, his right as a director. And so, but yeah, I mean, that movie was shot a while ago too. And then, because Spontaneous shot a while ago and Underwater shot a while ago. And then they both kind of got stuck in like two different corporate mergers. So the fact that they're all kind of coming out now is weird, because it sounds like, I spent last year just like making tons of stuff. But like, I want to say Underwater shot in 2017.
Really?
Like,
okay. I didn't realize. Wow.
I shot Spontaneous. I'm pretty sure they did. And then
what year did you shoot Spontaneous?
2018.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then it was like, I think with the Disney Fox merger, they just got stuck for a long time. And then we had two mergers. So we were Spontaneous had two. So that was also like a bizarre kind of confluence of events. And then I can't really...
Look, you've been through the ringer, so I just wanted to show people, because because we're gonna go full Spontaneous next, but like I think you're a really nice and sweet guy. You've come to my screenings for years.
Thanks. Yeah.
And like, there's some writers that are on my VIP list, and they come and they literally just see the movie and walk out. And then you're a guy that would often stay for the Q&A because you really care.
Yeah.
You really care about the writing, and it's just like, I think you've been through the ringer a lot, and it's always good to show people that, like, if you stick to your guns and you keep doing the work, one way or another, even through bad experiences, that you're going to grow as a filmmaker. And that's exactly what you did to get us to this point. So kudos to you on that.
Oh, thank you.
Let's get to the good stuff now.
Yeah.
There's a book by Aaron Starmer. It's called Spontaneous. When did you first come across the book and realize that you wanted to make a film out of it? And remember, we're going to get deeper into the spoilers, but No.
Yeah. I got sent the book. It was when we were making the pilot, or it was like right before. So I want to say it was like 2017. And it was not published yet. I got it. They were like, it's competitive, so you kind of have to read it overnight, which happens sometimes, but not too often. The first page of the book, I think I knew it was about kids blowing up, it would have been like a very, like, I don't even know if there was a log line because it was so early.
So it was before it was published, obviously.
Yeah, it was well before. I think I was done writing the script before it was published. They were, so I got the book, and then the first page is the first scene of the movie. And, where it's, this girl is in school, she's bored, and then another student randomly just explodes. And like, that's, one hell of a hook. And then just like, reading the book, it was kind of like this fun experience where like I recognized both myself as like a character, but like myself as a writer in it a lot. Because it was that kind of thing, like I always kept hoping Aaron would do something and then he would do it. Because it was like the kind of thing, like if I was the writer, I would do this, which doesn't usually happen when I'm reading things. But like in this one, like I felt very much like I was in tune with what he was doing and what he was trying to say about life and grief, and how he was using the spontaneous combustions to talk about a lot of different issues. And then like I finished the book, and then like I think I got on the phone with him like the next day and was just like, you have to let me do it. And I think I sent him other scripts of mine, but not other movies of mine. And was just kind of like, look, the writing's not shit. And then but then we got along kind of like right away. And then he read every draft and gave me notes, and it was a really great partnership on that one. Yeah.
The concept of people spontaneously combusting has been, thrown around forever. In your research, did you ever come up with any legit case or explanation for an actual spontaneous combustion?
I didn't do a ton of research. Because a lot of spontaneous combustion stories are kind of like that fire is involved too. And I knew kind of right away, like I didn't want to have like burning kids. And the book, I don't think was burning either. I think it was just like, again, like the balloon pop kind of thing. But I did Google it, and like I would find like a lot of like drunken Irish guys that caught on fire because they fell asleep drunk by like a fire. And then they like burned in a crazy amount, and everyone's like, they were probably just literally covered in alcohol, and their whole insides was alcohol. So stuff like that. But I didn't go too deep into it because I thought what Aaron did so well was using the, again, like kind of using this like goofy idea as like a jumping, like a kind of like a, like an umbrella that you can kind of talk about all these different issues. And then, because I'm, terrible, like I knew it was going to be really hard, and I really liked the idea of like people being like, this sounds really dumb, and then working really hard to like legitimize it and then make people really go through all the
you're talking about battling the suspension of disbelief for the audience with the concept of spontaneous combustion.
But also like part of it being like, it's a movie where 40 kids are going to explode and it's going to be really silly, and then you're going to go like in an existential journey about what life means and cry. And that's been like one of the fun things, like as the reviews have been coming out, and as people have kind of been, like the tweets are great where it's like kids that are just like, what the fuck am I watching? And then they're just like, why am I still crying? It's this kind of thing where, and I think that was what was so great about the book, is that it starts off, literally how the movie starts is the exact same as the book. And then he really like, you're kind of like on this like la-di-da, kind of weird comedy. And then it morphs into like such a different beast. And just the way he played with tone is really similar to how I like to play with tone. So
and we'll get
symbiotic kind of author relationship. Yeah.
We'll get to tone for sure, because that's something I wanted to talk about. Well, so here we are, this kid Duffield, he has never directed a thing in his life. He's been on, for the most part, one set, two sets, your pilot and babysitter, right? Because
I mean, I was on the set of Jane for some. Yeah. Right. And actually, I was on the set of Divergent, not the sequel, but the first one for a couple weeks too. Yeah.
Oh, really? Because you already had the job for Insurgent?
I started writing Insurgent, I think they were like a week into shooting Divergent.
Oh, got it. Okay.
I was on set writing Insurgent.
That's cool. But nonetheless, my point is, never directed anything. Like, haven't directed Traffic, but Duffield's a nice kid. What was the challenge for rising up and saying, you know what, this time, guys, I'm going to be the storyteller. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to be the director. How did you get through those hoops?
It wasn't as difficult as it probably could have been. I think a lot of the people that I made the pilot with were on the movie. And, being like a showrunner type isn't that different from directing. Like, not to take any of what Shackman did away, but like, you're on set, you're casting people, you're talking to the actors in a way that it would be inappropriate for a writer to otherwise. And so like, and it was such a good experience that I don't think anyone involved was like, what will he do? And then, a big part of it too is, I was making the movie for sure, kind of before casting Catherine. But Catherine, Golden Globe nominee, like however many tens of millions of, social media followers, kind of like, when you have like an actor sign on too, everyone's kind of like, well, the actor's buying in, and the actor is the value of the movie is sold on her face. Right.
It's how they raise money for foreign sales and other sales. So of course.
Yeah. I don't think we did the foreign sales thing, because I think it was just the Awesomeness Studio paid at the time. But it was still just kind of like, we're not going to lose money because she's in the movie kind of thing. And then her signing off on me kind of makes everyone go, well, she's happy. She's in the movie. We get our money back, kind of.
Did you have a good meeting with her when you were like,
I knew her a little bit. Yeah, I knew her a little bit before on a movie that I wrote and was producing that I wasn't going to direct. This other wonderful director was attached. And so we'd known each other a little bit, and it was a really different movie, like in every way. And then
which movie?
It never has been announced. I'll keep it that way.
Okay.
But it was like a fantasy thing, basically. And and then I think our start date got pushed for a while, and then she became available for like a window. And so I got on the phone with her, and I mean, she's always been one of my favorite people. And so it wasn't we didn't talk like a long time, because I think she knew really quickly that she wanted to do it and that she liked me. And I was just kind of like, you know, she's.
But serious question. So you attached her before you went out with this so that you could have it as a package, which would reinforce your strength as a director. Is that correct?
No. So I sold it to Awesomeness kind of like right off the pitch call. So they paid me to write the scripts. So they at the time they were a full studio. They're not anymore. They're just like a subdivision of Viacom. But at the time it was just like, you know, I think Kaplan at Awesomeness could just be like, yeah, like we'll buy the book and you can make the movie kind of thing. So it was a very different.
And so they told you could direct right at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think with like, you know, if you can build the value in the movie.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. And then Catherine just was that value.
Great. Easiest. That's one of the easiest stories I've ever heard for somebody having to prove.
That part, the getting to make the movie was a breeze, and then everything after it was a nightmare.
Well, so let's talk about your habit for a second. When you break down a book, how important is outlining to your process when you're working on an original or when you're obviously breaking down a book?
I don't do it for either.
Tell us why. I mean, there's no one way to do it. So why do you?
I hate outlining. If it's a spec, like I really hate it, and I find my outlines. And sometimes when you get hired to do it, they make you outline. And I always feel like my outlines are basically the script, without dialogue. But most of the time there is dialogue. So then I'm just like, this is like a 70-page outline. Like
your outlines are 70 pages. Because I mean, sometimes
for me, it's just like I'm just kind of like I'm writing the scenes out, like it would be an outline, and I'm like, oh, like if I spend 5 more minutes, it's a scene as opposed to like a slug line. Like for me, it's like I don't understand the difference in my brain, because I find that I have to write a lot to kind of understand what the outline should be. So it's like, it just becomes like this wormhole where it's happened a couple of times where I'll get hired to write an outline and I'll just be like, it's a script. And they'll be like, oh, cool. Great. And so like, yeah, I've never been able to just do like the like bullet point kind of thing.
So even on specs, do you have a sense of where you're going to end in that case, or do you not always know? I mean, with a book adaptation, you obviously would know.
Sometimes, yeah, on specs, sometimes I know, but I like being surprised and changing. And like there'll be times like I'll throw out like half of a thing because I'm like, oh, I thought of a better thing. And like I know it's better, and I'm not beholden to, especially when it is like an original thing where I can throw out half of a thing and no one knows, and it's just if I like it more. And then with a book, like you definitely get more benchmarks. I think with Spontaneous, how I adapted it was, I think I read it, I want to say like 2 or 3 times, and then I read it once more, and I kind of had like a notepad. Actually, I had a printout of it. It was here somewhere. And I just wrote down like everything that I wanted, kind of like as if like I was like with a on a spending spree like at a store, and I kind of was just like, I want this line, I want this line, I want this scene, I want this scene. And then I had kind of like this little collection of things where like some of it was just like literally like a line or like a little fragment of a scene, but like I didn't think I needed like the full scene, because the book was, I think, if we're like 95 minutes and the book is I think like 350, so there was a lot of like figuring out like what to leave out. And then I had that, and then I like read it a bunch of times, like just like kind of, and it wasn't like an outline, it was really just like kind of like a
big notes document,
like a Pinterest thing almost. And then I just wrote it without using anything. And a bunch changed from just that process, because you can, in my head I was kind of like, oh, like this is a little long, this is a little short, like this tone is, too hard, too soft. I mean, it's all the same things as the post process turned out to be too. And And then like I had like a draft. I sent it to Aaron. He thankfully liked it, but was like, "You're too faithful in these places, and it's hurting the movie." And so, like, again, it was like the best relationship. And I mean, I've always been. I think even going back to what we were talking about earlier, in terms of how people treat writers. I mean, it was such a benefit to me to have Aaron be involved because he's as smarter about the material than me for sure. But also just the fact that he was like, "This is great." It was such like a wind in the sails of like, oh, like, because for a while it was just the two of us kind of, where I was like, well, this is the person who should hate it the most. And if he's happy, like you're on like a correct path. And also then like notes wise, you're like, no, he knows, like, I can trust his notes because I'm here.
He created the universe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just feel like in general, like if people treated writers better, they would probably have that whole experience where the movie is 100% better because. And Aaron was on set for a little bit, like as a visitor, and he was never like, do this or don't do this, but like just the best. Like it was such a great.
That's awesome.
But I had that relationship with Veronica Roth on Insurgent, and like I think pretty much every author I've worked with, because I'm just kind of like, well, if they hate it, it's gonna really suck.
As for your habit, when you sit down to write, how many hours a day do you write, or do you give yourself a page count to hit?
No, I know a lot of people do the like I have to write a certain amount. I find that I don't do that. Like I feel like I can hit like a stream of writing, and I'll be like 20 pages, and it's like an hour later, and it's great. And then I'll find like there's like 2 or 3 days afterwards where like nothing is getting written, and I've just learned to not beat myself up about that. Because I've like there's like a certain amount of writing I want to do a year, even just like from a financial standpoint. But I'm like, well, if I don't write for a week and then on the 8th day I write 20 pages, there's no difference except I'm not beating myself up for that. And I find that probably because I don't outline too, like I really enjoy writing. Like I've never been one of those people that's like, I hate writing. Like I've always really enjoyed it. But I also really enjoy like the thinking about it a lot. So it's like, I find that when I do write, it's because I've been like thinking about things for a long time, and I'm just kind of like, well, it's cooked up here. So I just, got to plop it down kind of thing. And so I feel like my scripts are mostly like these kind of weird bursts of like 5, 10, 20 plus pages, like scattered around a month. And then it's like, oh, it's here. Like I don't think I've done like I write 6 pages every day thing, even like since college. Yeah.
Well, so what do you do if you get writer's block? How do you handle it if you get it?
I just think about things for a while. I try not to beat myself up about not writing. I mean, now too, like being a professional writer, like I have multiple things going on. And so it is nice in terms of like, if I'm stuck on spontaneous, like I can go and spend the day on this other thing that, is going to be due. And that helps because, I find like a lot of times you're stuck and your brain wants to keep going. And so just like changing what you're writing is a big help. But I think, the thing I just, really doing my best to not be angry at myself if I have writer's block. Like, I feel like that's been the thing where I've really, and maybe it's like a maturity thing, but I feel like in the last few years I've kind of been like, I've been aware that it's going to get done. And so then if I am stuck on something, I don't, and especially if it's a spec, like, I can put a spec away for a year or two. And just have like these like 30 pages and I'm like, these are really good. And I just haven't thought of the next scene. And then one day I'll think of the next scene and be like, I'll zip it through it. It's like different when it's an assignment, but I do assignments, but I don't do a ton of them. And so I feel pressure when it comes to that. But I think for me, it's, it's just letting yourself, like, I feel like Diablo, Cody said that too, where, just letting yourself be okay with not having written. because I think a lot of writers really beat themselves up because they haven't written like 6 pages a day or whatever. And then it becomes like that kind of sick cycle of abuse, of self-abuse, where you're just kind of like, oh, I'm such a piece of shit because I didn't do the work today. But I think, you know, if you're just kind of like, oh, today is just not a day where the words are going to come, let me watch a movie that's in the vein of what I'm doing, or
you go to the well for inspiration, of course.
Or even just go the opposite direction where you're just like, I'm going to watch something that has nothing to do with anything. And just like, you know, I think that kind of like self-forgiveness for me, it's been really beneficial, where like, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years professionally now. And it's like the kind of thing, like I've never not done a job. Or I've never like not finished a script. And so I kind of was at the point where like, I know I'm going to finish it. I know I'm not going to be late. You know, all these different things. And then just being like, oh, it's not going to happen today. Like, that's okay. Like I found that to be very healthy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, so you got to, I noticed in the credits, the Directors Guild of Canada was in there. So did you also get to join the DGA?
No, I still don't understand the Directors Guild of it all. Like I'm not eligible for the Directors Guild because I'm an American, but I shot my first thing in Canada. So I'm like under this, because I'm an American too, but like, I'm under like this weird, you know, like foster care program with the DGC, where I'm not in the DGC either, but they're handling like my residuals and my rights.
Well, so why couldn't you go DGA though? Why couldn't you get into the DGA?
There's some like weird provision where it's a Canadian, you know, I think it's like kind of technically a Canadian. I mean, we shot the whole thing in Canada for the most part. And then being an American, shooting in Canada, but not being in the Directors Guild, like there's a part of them that goes, well, you should be covered by the Directors Guild of Canada because your whole crew, everything is Canadian except for you. So why wouldn't Canada cover, like in all of the other, you know, because it's you know, it's not just like me, it's like, you know, the ADs are all
right
gilded, and they're all DGC too. So I think that was kind of what
I was just curious.
Happened. Yeah.
What was the most important part of pre-production that really helped you as a director? Did you have a lot of rehearsal time? Was storyboarding or previs really important to you?
No, we kind of had like this weird crunched pre-production because our DP Aaron didn't. He lives in New Zealand, and so he didn't get to set or to Canada until really late in the game. So we did storyboard a little, but not a lot at all. And I think it was just. You know, on the one hand, we did a lot of blood rehearsal because that's such a huge part of the movie. And then it was a lot of, you know, especially with Catherine, we didn't have a lot of rehearsal time early. But I think we had like maybe like one day before like her and Charlie and Haley came to like our hotel suite, and we kind of just ran through things. But yeah, I think it was just kind of, you know, getting used to the fact that like, you know, in that pre-production, like, you know, everyone is looking at you for answers about everything.
How long did you have for pre-production?
I had, well, yeah, I mean, but like, it's like, you know, that's so different. Like, you know, when you're a writer and someone asks you a question and someone else is directing something, you know, you have to walk a really fine line of like not saying you disagree with the director. And so you kind of do like the, like, you know, kind of, you know, whatever Jeff says kind of thing, you know, you very much have an opinion. And then in this, it's just, you know, it's just like, which car do you want in the scene? And you have to go like that one, because if you don't say that one, you know, it takes up time. And so I think in pre-production, it was kind of just getting used to the authority. And then, you know, it also, you know, one of the things the two kind of crippling things that we went through on Spontaneous was, you know, we were working in the winter. And so that was a big problem. And then also Awesomeness was kind of in the process of selling as a studio. And so there's these kind of like, you know, days were disappearing a lot in terms of the schedule. And then also you were like looking at your weather coming up and you were like, oh, like it's going to snow all week. And it's a movie that takes place over a school year. And so then it was a lot of kind of scrambling writing to, figure out how to make a movie in a blizzard while you were losing days because the studio was evaporating. And so a lot of it was just like, we have to like go. I remember like with the producers and everything, it was just like, hey, like this is not going to last. Like this, we have to get done before this studio kind of disappears. And so a lot of it was kind of like this, like go energy. And then it was also, on the writing side of it, like the lesson was, I don't want to say half the movie was improvised, not written, but like kind of like that night, the night before would be like a lot of like, okay, what is like the worst case scenario version of a scene? Because we are going like the whole next day is outdoors and it's going to snow and it's set in May. And so it was a lot of that kind of writing. And like, the thing, like I can see like the Frankenstein scars on the movie where there's things where like, like I feel really bad because like Yvonne Orji, who plays the FBI agent, like her first scene in the movie, we weren't able to use because it snowed throughout the scene. And then it just was like this weird continuity bump. And so she's by default, like in the movie less than I wanted.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Because the footage was like crazy, because it would be like literally like buckets of snow, no snow on the reverse angle. It was just like this nightmare kind of thing. And then it was like, well, like what's like the most we can make this work?
Would you say the lesson would have been there to just take the camera and shoot, make the scene in one, like do it in one so that there's no continuity? Because that's what I've heard a lot from people.
No, I mean, it wasn't even like that. It was more. Well,
then you wouldn't have had a continuity error.
No, it was the continuity of like the previous scene and the after scene.
Oh, okay.
So it's like daylight, and there's a little bit in the movie like when Mara goes from the funeral and then goes to buy drugs. It's like a crazy difference, even though it's the same day. And like we kind of just in color, we played it off as like this emotional coloring thing, where it's like very gray and moody on the one and then very bright and sunny on the other. And we just had to like lean into it. But like with Yvonne's, it was like, it was just like, it was snowing so much that like the next scene, which we had already shot, has no snow in it, but it's like, minutes later kind of thing. And so it was just this thing where you were like, and then with Yvonne, we only had her for 2 days. Like it was very short. And it was a short schedule in general. And so it was a lot of things where, it was like, well, we're getting snowed out. And then also like more important scenes, like the graveyard scene at the end of the movie, that got snowed out. So then it was like trying to figure out like where we can put this in the movie. So it was kind of like this weird dance of losing things that would make the movie better, but in service of things that would make the movie as good as possible, which is not like a screenwriter problem. Sure. Otherwise in other production, like unless you're in production. And so that was kind of the biggest pre-production and production challenge, was just kind of that like constantly writing on the fly, because things like we were just, I think when we started shooting, we were supposed to be 25 days and then we ended on 21 because it was just kind of like,
what was your budget?
I don't know. I want to say it's under 5.
Okay.
I think part of it is just because the studio was, I've heard numbers and I've been like, there's absolutely no chance that's a true number. So,
and they never let you know as the director? You never knew what it was?
No, I'll put this, like I've made movies at a bunch of budgets at this point, and they've told me numbers on Spontaneous, and I've always just been like, it might have cost that, but like I don't know where a lot of that money went, because I've made movies, like I've just made things for in that price range before, whether it's The Pilot or The Babysitter, and like so I kind of get a sense of like what that is. And like I know what all the crew got paid. I know what I got paid. I know what the cast got paid. And so like, you can kind of, sometimes you hear these numbers and you're just like, that's not true. But I also think part of that too was, I think we were the last production of a studio that was imploding. And so I don't think it was like anything unethical. I think it was just a lot of like,
no, I got you.
Money that needs to get accounted for kind of deal.
Well, so tell me this, like Cliff Notes version, because I want to lean even further into it in a second here. What was your biggest lesson about the studio imploding while this was happening? Like, give us your Cliff Notes most surreal moment.
I mean, one of our producers, Jordan Levin, was like just a great. I mean, it still is a great guy, but it was like he was like definitely like a real. He was the head of awesomeness, and he was like a real champion of the movie. Like he would just, you know, he visited, but like he would also just call me like on weekends and like really check in. Like, you know, he was just like, in terms of like a studio head, like the dream studio head. And it was great because he would disagree with me about things, but like be like, it's your choice, but like, let me explain to you why I disagree with you. And so a lot of the stuff he brought up is in the movie because I couldn't argue better than he could. And like in a way that I love. Because I was like, well, if, you know, I don't have a good retort, you're probably right. And he's been around, like, I think he greenlit Felicity. Like, she's been around forever. But so the studio, we were in post and the studio sold, and like that, like it sold in that day, he's gone, you know, he's off, you know, off the studio, off the movie kind of thing. And so it was like that kind of thing, where, you know, and it was such, I think the frustrating thing about awesomeness selling and then Viacom CBS merging is that it has absolutely nothing to do with you. Which is kind of what the movie is about at the same time. But it's this thing where it's like, there's no, you know, it's like Sumner, Redstone and shit. Like they're not merging to mess up Spontaneous, you know?
Yeah. Like you got caught in the middle.
We're like a tiny fly in this world compared to like the big Wall Street kind of stuff going on. But at the same time, then you're kind of like, well, it's been 8 months. Like, can I do anything on the movie? And then people would be like, we don't know. Like there was literally, I think like 8 months where like no one was 100% sure on who owned the movie. So no one wanted to like pay for work to be done on the movie. And then that was
because you still needed to complete post basically.
Yeah. Like we more or less had like a finished cut when everything kind of shut down. But then that was like it. Like there wasn't like another there weren't other departments kind of going. It was just like there's like the edit and then stop. And then it would be like, so even like we didn't have a post supervisor until the end of 2019, and we started post in March of 18.
Okay, that's crazy.
So it was like, but it was like, and you know, you get it in your head, and you know, thankfully, you know, Rotten Tomatoes is making me feel good about myself now. But you get into your head like, you know, the movie's a disaster because you're on a shelf for, you know, over a year. But then you like also remind yourself that no one has seen the movie, which is like this weird thing too, where you're just like, hopefully when someone sees the movie, they'll like it. And so that was like an interesting kind of lesson where, and I found it really, like I'll recover from that one for a while, I think, because I found it really hard to even like work on other things because it felt so.
You're in a sense of stasis. You're, you know.
Yeah, for lack of a better word, it felt so adulterous where like, you know, like every day someone's like asking you about, you know, this movie you have not finished. And you're also like, you know, please, can I have a job? And so, you know, if I'm honest, I probably lost work and money because of it, but just because people were like, well, what happens when the studio's like, okay, we need you for 8 weeks to finish the movie? Like, what's going to happen? So that was really hard. I wrote like a lot of the stuff I'm hoping to direct next kind of over that period of time. But like, even like, you know, for the most part, like people haven't been seeing the movie except for like the last like month. And like, you know, thankfully, you know, people have responded to it, but like, that was really hard.
It's fascinating because I want to move into the spoilers, but my last non-spoiler question is like, what's so wild about it being delayed this long is that you're writing this fictional element about a pandemic before there was a pandemic. And now some people, when they see the trailer, they're like, wow, how did they shoot this movie during the pandemic, making fun of a pandemic? Because it's so like of the moment. It's so today. So it's interesting because you got certain things right about pandemic life, and then certain things you just couldn't have known until you went through it.
Oh yeah.
So,
No, Catherine and I were joking about, and Charlie, we were joking about like this like weird zone of like we can see the inaccuracies of like CDC response, and like we were finished before the shutdown. Like we finished I think in like February, so like right at the gasp. And it was like that thing where, you know, and there was like a short like deleted scene where like Catherine's like goofing around with like a mask on, and like it just didn't make the cut because there was funnier things to put in to like that montage. But like now we're just like, oh, it could have been so much more on the nose, and we just would have had no way of knowing.
well, it's crazy. I mean, like they're in quarantine, and you know that's correct. You know, they're in quarantine, they're isolated. The first version of the pill, like well, actually, I'll get to that in the spoilers.
Yeah.
They're in quarantine, but it's funny because like then like after they're out of quarantine, they're just like at football games, they're with their parents, and you're kind of like, yeah, maybe there would be a longer period knowing what we know now before they like are.
I was saying like the movie's slight defense, like it was, you know, never something that we saw as contagious. Like it was just this kind of thing that was happening to just this room of kids basically. And it was not ever something that happened with rhyme or reason or like a contagious aspect. I think you're right. Like, I think if I was doing like the realistic version, like those kids probably would have been in like a tent for a year.
Or just not return to their homes. But wait, actually, that's interesting you brought that up, because I was going to bring this up later, and it's still kind of non-spoilery. Like, so you consider that it's not happening across America. It's really just happening in this one town with this one class, and it's contained to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, so I
think part of it too was, honestly, budget limitations. Like,
well, sure.
Where it was just like, even one of the things that I cut out of the book early in subsequent drafts from the first was like the CDC bringing back to the town like every kid that ever moved away from the town, which I thought was like an interesting idea, because they were just like, we don't know when, like maybe they all drank like bad juice boxes and it's triggering now. And then that turns out to be true in the book. That like, you know, I think like a kid far away from their school dies, and then they're like, oh, but he grew up in our town. Like it becomes like that kind of web. And it just
contact tracing.
Yeah, basically. And it just became clear that, you know, it's Mara's movie. And, you know, if it doesn't like directly kind of hit Catherine, like it could go. And I think Starmer was the one who was just like, lose this.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I thought was really great that, you know, I've been telling my kids is like, you know, there's a part in the movie where she's not even sure if she should keep applying to college. And the dad's like, look, you know, you've got to be prepared for when this ends. You've got to just keep doing the right thing and leading your life the way you should, so that when this ends, you're not stunted. And like, that's kind of what I've been encouraging with, you know, my kids, or much younger than that, like all along. Yeah. In which, you know, because like they have friends in their Zoom classes that have figured out how to do repeating videos. They could play video games and seem like they're in the class, and fake pictures, and my camera's broken shit.
My brother is a sophomore in college, and there's like a minute there in the summer where he was just like, do I go back? Like, do I take a year off? Like, you know, that kind of, what are we doing kind of thing. And so it's funny. It's like, you know, Haley has a line in the movie about how people have been dying for 7 months. And like, that's literally how long the COVID shutdown has been.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very unhappy about the delays it took. But at the same time, you know,
it brought a relevance to it. Strangely.
Yeah, the lenses that people are watching the movie on, like, I don't know if I'd have as great of reviews as we've been getting if like, because I think now it feels like so like weirdly of the moment that it's covering people's.
I actually think it's a good movie, and you would still get good reviews. Really briefly before the spoilers, when did you decide that you were going to do a lot of fourth wall breaking, which I thought was cool? I mean, obviously it goes back to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
It was really early because her voice in the book is so great, and it was, you know, I go both ways on the voiceover thing, but I thought it was really helpful in terms of setting the tone of the movie. Because, you know, if you think of like that first couple of scenes, if like you don't have that voiceover, it would probably be like really traumatic and scary. And And so like having her have voiceover to kind of guide us tonally through, especially the start and the end of the movie, it felt like essential because again, like I know I'm the exploding kids movie. And part of why I'm like, hey, I'm going to show a kid explode 10 seconds in is because I know a lot of, to be honest, like the core audience of like that teen rom-com world are probably not going to want to watch a bloody movie. And so it was like, okay, so like what are all the ways that can be like, it's not going to be that bad. You're going to be able to hang with the blood. But then also tonally, it's not going to be a dark, heavy movie. It is dark, but it's not going to be an unwatchably unpleasant experience. Like it's going to be fun. And so the voiceover felt like a way to do that. But also for me, it was even more important than that, or maybe side important, was I wanted people to feel like Catherine was going to be okay and that it wasn't going to be the kind of movie, because, a lot of the movie is her by herself too. And I didn't want people to be so aware of the possibility that she could die kind of mid-movie.
Well, unless you have an unreliable narrator, like, American Beauty or whatever.
Well, it was funny. So, like, we shot, we shot scenes, like, not a lot, but, like, one or two scenes, and there was, like, a line. And one's, like, when Yvonne is interrogating the girls, and Yvonne's like, we're close to figuring it out. Like, there's a scene of, Catherine at the end of the movie and that location looking at the camera and being like, they never figured it out. And then cutting back to the scene. And people were just like, we know she's going to be okay with like the voiceover and because she's telling the story.
Yeah.
But seeing her okay or like seeing her alive is a step too far. But that was where it came from, where it was like me being conscientious of, 40 kids are going to explode for no reason throughout this movie. And I need you to even subconsciously be like, the person who's taking us on this movie is okay and is going to make it. And like voiceover and the fourth wall stuff just felt like a way to do it. And then the fourth wall stuff with Charlie was honestly, I mean, we can get into that with the spoilery stuff too, but I was just like, I need you to fall in love with this boy as soon as possible. And then having Charlie just look into the camera, you're just like, oh, this is a good man. Like right away. Yeah.
Let's get into it because I actually want to talk about Charlie Plummer and Dylan. So podcast listeners, YouTube watchers, for our Zoomcast, if you have not yet seen Spontaneous, this is the moment where you press pause because we are going to get into all the spoilers. Go watch it. You could find it through any way that you stream movies. It's a funny film. It's got some great drama too in the third act, as we're going to talk about in a second. But come back and then listen to the rest. So here we go into the spoilers. Charlie Plummer plays Dylan, and I was glad that you kept the teeth of the book in which he dies. Yeah. He's the sweetest kid ever, and he totally explodes when you don't expect him to. So tell us about that decision to keep that in there.
No, I mean, for me, that was why. That was like, I love the book, and then when I got to Dylan's death, I was like, I have to do this because I can't remember how many pages were left in the book, but it was a lot. Like, it's not like the end of the sorry, my daughter's just screaming no over and over in the next room. But it's not the end of the movie or anything like that. Hold on. They're getting it. Okay. And so for me, it was like, oh, like this is the game Aaron is playing, where it's, Catherine gets to be like this snarky, like, hey, I'm ignoring the world person for 2/3 of the movie, and then this thing happens where it's not just Dylan's death, it's just kind of like the weight of this year that she's really kind of been suppressing, kind of gets to hit her full force. And then that's when you're like, oh, this is a story about grief and figuring out how to turn the page when something totally awful happens for no reason. Everyone I think goes through it at certain times. And so that was for me, like when I was really like, oh, okay.
It was a great moment, and I'm glad you kept it. And you also used the fourth wall breaks for a different character than your lead character. So how did you decide that you were going to do that? Because Dylan does have his own fourth wall breaks as well.
Yeah, well, his fourth wall breaks are a little different from Catherine's because we're the audience is who Catherine is talking to. But when Dylan breaks the fourth wall, he's essentially just talking straight to Catherine. And that was something that I knew, I kind of had I didn't have 90 minutes to have them fall in love. Like I kind of needed them to fall in love in like 5 minutes, because I had limited time with oh no, because I had limited time with Charlie, and that was, for me, it was like, okay, like if we just do him looking at us, and because he's such a wonderful human, like just in real life too, that I was just like, kind of like, you're looking at him and you're like, I trust this guy. Like this is a genuine and a good guy.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then knowing, like, even in the scripts, and kind of, and this came out with my DP, Aaron Morton, Catherine brings up, the first time we really hung out with Charlie, she saw so many of him, and now she can't see any of him. And that was something that we decided to play with, where, he really is looking directly at her, kind of when she's on shrooms. And then, like, at the very end, they're looking straight at each other down the camera when he dies. And it just felt like a device where we could just, like, we're kind of being douchebags because we are, like, killing the nicest boy that ever lived. Which is, kind of the point of the movie. And just knowing, like, we have that device where, like, we can really, I don't know if like skip steps in terms of like falling in love with this boy and as like a partner for Catherine, but it felt like a real shorthand that we could use, that we were like able to accelerate that process with her. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, it was great. What was something that you wanted to do from the book or from your script that you just couldn't afford, that just never was even shot, that just was like, okay, in the dream version, I would have been able to do this, just out of curiosity?
Would have been a little more Yvonne. Because I was bummed about how that turned out. Because, like, she had a scene that was supposed to be in the tent. Like, I think I could have made them, and the script was more cohesive than what we were able to do, as opposed to, like, a cut. And then there's a scene that got cut right before we were shooting with Piper, which I was really sad to lose too. Especially, well, no, I think it got cut mid-shoot. It did get cut mid-shoot because the setup and payoff is there, where there's like a Springsteen runner in the movie where Dylan mentions a Springsteen song, and Catherine's like, I'm never gonna find that out. Like, I'm never gonna figure out what song you're talking about. And then there's like a little payoff of it when they're at prom, where she's like, Springsteen is really great, but there's no Springsteen in the middle. And what happened was, after he dies and she kind of goes on like her, crazy bender, she was like listening to like every Springsteen song, like really loud in her room, and like Googling lyrics. And like Piper came in and was like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm trying to find this Milk Truck song. And Piper's like, I don't know. There's no Springsteen song about milk trucks. And then there was like this moment where like Catherine like realized that like Charlie kind of was like, I could die, but it'd be really funny if I tricked this girl into listening to all of Springsteen's music. And
that's funny.
It was funny. It was like a little payoff. And she kind of was like, I can't remember what the scene was, but she's kind of like, that son of a bitch, and like starts crying again. And like Piper's just like, I don't know what to do. I think we cut it because I think we were like, we're never going to get Springsteen to sign off. Because I think Blinded by the Light was coming out, or there's something where like, there's a moratorium on Springsteen songs. And then also because Rob Hubel has like the cocktail scene, and we'd already shot that, I think. I can't remember. And that was one of the most important scenes in the movie to me, because that's like your first scene back after Charlie dies. And I was like, well, I can't ever lose that scene, as opposed to this other scene where like I kind of have like there's sort of like a setup payoff that's really light. I probably could have hit the joke harder, but like if I have to choose between an essential scene or this Springsteen scene, like I can lose the Springsteen scene. And I knew I already had gold with Piper too.
That's cool.
Piper's first shot was like when she goes into the shower, and it's such a great scene and performance that I was like, I remember kind of being like, well, I'm not like, I feel like I'm shortchanging every actor in the movie, but like I was like, if I have to choose between having 15 minutes more on the fight scene between Piper and Robin and Catherine, or like this other scene where I'm probably not going to get the music anymore that I thought I was going to get, that's kind of what happened. So that was something that I was like, that would have been nice. And then there's always like this thing my manager pitched after he saw the cut, which I've always been like, oh, that would have been really good. Which no one thought of it until post. But because Dylan talks about, when his dad died, he would dance in a barn, and then Catherine recreates that for him.
Which was a great way to like show their intimacy, not have to pay for a bunch of extras, do it cheaply. I don't know how these kids are still listening to Outfield in 2020, but I love it. The
Hooters, yeah. But it was because he specifically is like, I listen to 80s music. And so our logic was like Catherine was basically like 80s dance rock songs, and like, that song comes up.
Go
she's
Hooters.
She's not well versed in like the alt scene of the 80s. But then the idea would have been that in the third act she would go back and dance by herself in a barn, like kind of in that.
Oh, okay.
Super. I was always like, oh, that would have been really great.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But again, that was like one of those things that came up, after we saw the first cut, and I was like, oh, that's good.
Tonally, you did a great job. Tonally, I loved the dark humor of taking one of the children out of the family on the sticker on the back of the car.
I think that was the book.
It was, but I mean, visually, it was great.
Remember. Yeah, I honestly can't remember where that came from anymore. But like, I was like, again, like, because it was like trying to find scenes that were funny, but that the emotion was true. And I know I get compared to Heathers a lot, and I love Heathers. But I feel like the emotion that is a little distant and removed, where, it's a little broad. Like the human life doesn't have a huge consequence in that movie. Like even like the funerals are kind of silly, in like a great pitch black way. And for me, like I wanted to like really be like, kids are dying, like in this movie. Like we're not like shying away from the fact that kids are dying, but I also don't want it to be like so depressing. And that felt like one of those like awful, depressing but funny scenes where you're kind of like, it's so awful to watch, but it is also kind of funny. As opposed to if he was just like on his knees crying at a funeral, you're like, that's awful and relatable. Yeah. But I felt like having this guy like take off like a sticker, like it's kind of like, everyone drives by those cars that have those stickers. And it just felt like a way that you could have like a little bit of humor, but with also being like, oh, like she died. Like, we're not pretending it's
no, it was a dark moment. It was funny. It was visual. It was all the good stuff. Ooh, hey, I wanted to jump in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. If you've never read us, you could check out our free issue over at backstory.net. You could also read it via our iPad app, Backstory. And it's a good way to see who we are and what we do. And during the pandemic, your support would be hugely appreciated. And to make it even easier, I'm going to give you a discount coupon code that'll save you $5. It's SAVE5. That's save and the number 5. And you could use that over at backstory.net. And then your credentials from backstory.net could be used either on the website or via our iPad app if you want to read us that way. So there's a lot of reasons to read us. You could read us on a desktop or laptop, or as I said, via our iPad app. We are keeping things going during the pandemic. We are just getting ready to publish issue 42, our delayed pandemic issue. We have a lot of great stuff in there. And the minute we publish issue 42, we're going to start working on issue 43, and we can't do it without your help. Your help will help support the writers, editors, and art directors over at Backstory. And your support means everything to us during this pandemic. So I thank you profusely for considering. And of course, as we are doing such a massive interview with Brian, I hope you will support independent filmmaking and go check out Brian's film Spontaneous. You could find it wherever you rent movies online. But now, without any further ado, we are going to return to our conversation with writer, director Brian Duffield about his film Spontaneous. We were talking about budgetary restraints a second ago. Obviously, you have 40 exploding kids.
Yeah.
And you show a lot of blood. You said, as you said earlier, you had some blood rehearsals. Was there ever a plan, if you had more money, to show explosions in different ways? Because, you got a lot done for your budget with your special effects, but like you did it creatively because you didn't have as much. And I'm just curious, if you had more money, would you try and show your explosions in a different fashion?
I don't think so. at all, probably. Just because, we hold back on showing it for a long time. Like you just kind of see like the splatter. And that was more of a creative choice than any kind of budget choice. So I think, and I don't think anyone's like, there's not enough exploding kids in the movie.
Oh no, I just mean creatively.
No.
Like if you
I
had more money.
Think so. No, I don't think so. I mean, the one place it would have helped a lot was in the car. Just because every shot in the car was an effect shot, because it was.
I was going to talk about that next, so I'm so glad we're talking about it now. I love the car sequence. I cannot.
Oh, great! That was the worst scene by far, because it was great. It was a green screen. Well, it was quite a bit longer. It was intended to be a little bit longer.
Just in what they talk about.
Sorry.
In what they talk about?
No. Like kind of in the actual, from the exploding. And it was. It's the kind of thing where like every shot cost a certain amount of money, and as things were shutting down, studio side, we just were like, oh, we don't have the money to do this scene well anymore, basically. And so it probably is, I'd say, even like half as long. It's a little bit more like stylistic now, and that was hard. Like it took a while for us to kind of figure out how to tell a story, that story of the set piece kind of in, I'll say, half as many shots as what we had planned and storyboarded and shot and everything. So that was like a budget kind of area that was gnarly. But like in terms of like how I presented the exploding, I think it's probably pretty similar to what's in the movie, just because, it was such an important, if you get it wrong or you kind of lean more into, an offensive place, the whole movie's kind of sunk. So, we spent a lot of time on that. And the more money would have just meant that we had a little bit more safety in terms of resetting if something went wrong.
Sure.
But, because we knew, if something went wrong, that's like an hour of a reset that you can't, I can't shoot with Catherine or Charlie, or and if I can't shoot with Catherine, I can't really shoot anything. I think pretty much every scene with blood is the first take in the movie, because we like would rehearse it with like the AD going bang and like everyone like reacting as if it had happened, and then a lot of the kids rehearsed getting shot with blood before we started shooting. So like Caitlin Bernard, who plays Sky in the movie, who's the girl like directly behind Catherine in the first scene. Like she came out and, just got the cannon in the face, like all of us. I got hit like 100 times probably. So yeah, everyone was just really on it, because we couldn't lose. Like if we lose an hour of shooting because everyone's getting a shower, we just lose a scene in the movie basically. So it was a lot of pressure to like not screw up those effects. And then the crew was really on it and was really great.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I mean, and so in the car scene, what would you say was the challenge that you had to get over, just briefly? Because there's other stuff I want to hit. But like, obviously you're dealing with green screen. It's cool because like two of her friends die in that scene, even though they're great, likable characters, and they're talking about good stuff. And then she's like, just a passenger in this car wreck. And so,
what happened was, like how the scene would have played out is a lot of it was after Lane, who's Jenna Dalton, died. So there was like kind of Lane explodes, and then there was about 30 seconds or so of Catherine trying to like, because she has to kind of wipe the windows and kind of figure out where she's going. Because like right now when you watch the movie, like no one's really been bumped by it, but like the car is like flipped over, but she's predominantly fine. Yeah. And it was kind of like sold the gag a little bit more of like, it's like they're not going like extremely fast, but like they kind of hit a ditch and Catherine sees a tree. Like there's just more math to it, where you're kind of like, oh, like she like just kind of like flopped, as opposed to like this kind of tumbly thing. And again, we just very quickly in post, we're just like the money for what we thought we were going to do isn't there. And then it was about like, okay, how do we not just kind of cut off that ending, but kind of throughout, like, how do we get people into seats in less shots than we had planned and boarded. And just because I can't remember how many shots it is, but it's not a ton. But it's like every shot is there's green screen, there's blood work on the windows just to make it match. Cause we tried to do as much as we could practical, but it's just slipping and sliding.
It's interesting. Yeah. Did you have any rules for the explosions of like who dies? I mean, because it seems like one of the themes of the movie is that it's life is chaotic, life is unpredictable, and you have to be prepared for it. Is what she ultimately learns. And I'm just curious if you had any rules in your mind as to who lives and who dies and why they live and die. If there was anything that was going on in their.
Yeah, it was. No, there's like characters that die in the book that don't die in the movie, and vice versa, where characters that don't die in the book die in the movie. And it was kind of just what the scenes necessitated. And it was kind of just like, well, I know Catherine's going to make it. And then, kind of who I could afford to say goodbye to. But I think one of the overall things was that I really wanted to make sure that none of the kids were bad kids. Like, there's not like a bully. There's not like a kid that...
Right, there's no cause and effect.
Yeah, like there was like... I know older drafts, there was like kids that, people didn't like and like that kind of... And it was like, that went away pretty quickly because it felt like it being, it just felt like, let's really make all these kids normal and likable. Because that's the whole point, like not really wanting to get into like, well, all the Nazis died because they were bad kind of thing. Well, it was just like, no, all these kids have value and had lives and friends. And, it just felt like that was kind of like one of the rules that kind of came in the writing process was it was just like, let's do away with kind of antagonism and like have the kids really kind of like band together. And that's kind of been one of the cool things about, the COVID of it all, where it really feels like young people have kind of all like, in like that TikTok sphere, they're all kind of like, to me it seems like they're all very nurturing and taking care of each other. I saw like an article about how like teens are doing really well during COVID, and that's probably because their lives are already so online anyway. But it also
video
like,
games have been great for my kids, actually.
But I think it's
talking to other kids, like when they're on the phone and stuff like that, and they're playing a game that they like, and they're on their own systems in different houses, it actually works. You were talking about antagonism for a second. Did you find it difficult to balance having an unknown antagonist? Like, the CDC is like annoying when they botch the first dose, and
there's no one bad, and like they're like
but there's no antagonist here. It's really just nature.
Yeah, and I think that was because it's such a big idea in terms of like the spontaneous combustions, and it really just felt like who, and again, this is pre-COVID. But it really kind of felt like how can you have a bad guy without making them responsible for the problem? And like now I understand how you can, yes. But at the time it just kind of felt like, like I wanted Luvia, who plays Dr. Rolanda, to be like someone who's like, I really want to help these kids. Like she has like kind of like this weird little relationship with Peter, one of the jocks in the movie, and he dies in front of her and she fails, and
right. I thought you were going for like a love setup with them, maybe.
I think that was all I think Peter kind of like gave himself this role of like, I'm going to like woo this lady.
It was funny.
Yeah, well, a lot of those interviews were like the interviews that she has with the kids, that was all for the most part improv kind of on the set, and we thought it was just going to be part of like another montage, and then when schedules kind of erupted and all that shenanigans went down, it really became the kind of thing where we were like, oh, we could make a full scene of this because we interviewed every kid, and it was great. And that's why like Bajan, who plays one of the jocks, the first jock that dies in the tents, he's not in the interviews because we thought it was going to come afterwards. And so there's a little bit of that editing shuffling going on.
Right. What did you learn about directing? What was something really important about directing, like for just figuring out on the set where to place your camera, how much coverage to get, and were you shooting with one camera or two? Just tell us a brief like light bulb moment in your journey as a director, because it was your first time directing.
Yeah, mostly with two, just because we were going so fast. And I liked shooting with two, just because I feel you can really sync up the give and take. I think for me, directing is such an extension of writing. Where like I feel like every screenwriter should direct, because it's even like just in terms like with Catherine especially, because she's very she's like a really nerdy actress, where she's like definitely someone that wants to know like what does every single line mean and like how is she presenting it, and finding like moments where she's like, well, she's Mara's being really sarcastic here, but how can I like show my humanity that like, oh, this is affecting me, and like that stuff all feels like such a continuation of the writing process, that for me, like there's like a very big blur in terms of the screenwriting and the directing side of things, and they are at the same point very different skill sets. But even like in terms of the camera, it's just like, well, again, like what do I want people to feel in this scene like that I wrote, and like how do I convey that with the camera, with an actor, and it's all about what's on the page to begin with. So I think for me, like it was nice to you kind of are really thinking of everything in terms of like, well, what is the scene, and especially because of both our weather and budget problems, knowing like, okay, like what's like the 5-minute version of shooting this scene, like what is all the information that we have to get out, what's like the emotion we have to get out, and then it was being like, okay, well, we have 5 minutes, so like what is this scene and its most core element, and again, and that all comes down to it's just another facet of writing, where there's versions where I'm like, oh, I would love to have spent Fincher time on every scene, but like
right.
When you're an indie movie, you get there's a couple of scenes in there that are 5-minute like whole. We spent 5 minutes shooting because we were just so run and gun.
That's
and a lot
awesome.
of it was having the DP and having my assistant Max and having Catherine and the rest of the actors, but just kind of all be like, what is the scene? Like, what do we need to get out of the scene? How do we get to the next scene? And, that's all. It's not that different from when your script is a little too long. You're trying to like whittle it down, and you're just trying to figure out like, oh, I can cut this and I'm not hurting them, or I'm hurting it as least as I can. I think. Yeah.
Sorry, were you still going to say something else, or?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. well, so one of the things that's interesting is that it takes a big turn in the third act.
Yeah,
and like especially after Dylan dies and everything else, which I know is a little before that. She gets into drugs, and a lot of people, especially even under pandemic situations, it has amplified some. Yeah. Drug use, especially drinking, you've seen reports on here and there, and she goes heavy into drinking. In movies, people have those moments when they get clarity sometimes, and they're able to kind of stop and put it behind them, which is harder to do in real life when you have chemicals as play. What were your thoughts on her journey there? Because it's really dark, but I mean, there's a little bit of redemption because she does come out of it. And, you definitely went all in, which again is prescient for what's going on in the real world right now. And I think gives a little bit of hope and inspiration to people that are having tough times during the pandemic for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think for me, it was important to, well, it's funny on the one hand, like when people saw the movie pre-COVID, they were like, she drinks a lot. And I was just like, yeah, she definitely drinks a lot. And then when they've seen it now, they're kind of just like, I get it. It's a very different thing. But I think for me with Mara too, the first thing she does once she gets home is start smoking weed, like at the start of the movie. And it was really important. That's something I talked to with Catherine a lot too, is like this crazy thing has happened and she doesn't have the capacity
deal with it like right away. And so her first instinct is always like, how can I distract myself? And so like she goes home, smokes weed. The next day, or whenever the funeral is, she instantly sees the stick figure on the car and is like, I need drugs. You know, instantly like, meets the boy and it's like, this boy is great. You know, and so a lot of the movie is her, you know, doing everything she can to distract herself. And I think for a while, you know, I'm hoping that audiences are kind of like bopping along with it because it's not like an unusual high school thing. Right. And then, you know, she doesn't stop kind of throughout the movie. And it's like, even like her parents are kind of participating in it to some extent. And then after Dylan dies, it gets way out of hand fast. And I think for me, that was part of it where it's, you know, it wasn't like Dylan dies and all of a sudden she's drinking. It's like, I've seen her by the time Dylan dies, you know, I've seen her drunk multiple times in the movie.
Right. For sure.
And that was part of it to me is like, it was that idea of like, she doesn't have, and Dylan's mom brings it up later in the movie is like, I thought you were in a lot of pain. You didn't know how to deal with it. And for me, I think, you know, when I've struggled with things, it's really easy to like, what's like, you know, the most nurturing thing I can find that is terribly unhealthy. And it's, you know, alcohol can be that way. You know, she, you know, reads the comments on Reddit, you know, like does all the things you should not do. And I think for her, it's, you know, she has that tendency throughout the whole movie for sure. And then I think she's so desperate to put a sign on what she's going through in terms of she's like, well, the drinking's not helping. Like I'm still really depressed and, you know, blaming myself, everyone's blaming themselves. So it can't be my fault. And wallowing in the grief, you know, isn't, you know, she can't find anything to help her kind of get through it. And that was important to me because I know it's, you know, we talked a lot in the edit and in the writing of it where like, I think there's 2 points in the movie that were intentionally a little too long. and the first is like after the tents, because you're kind of like, well, they got out of the tents, you know, like 45 minutes in. So clearly we're not going to spend like an hour more with no one exploding. So you're kind of playing with that tension of like, you know, it's going to happen again. But then after that, it was after Charlie died. Because I you know, I feel like a lot of those movies kind of like montage away grief.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I was like, I really want her to go through it because I think when she gets out of it and gets to that ending, you're kind of like, you know, we've been in the mud and it takes too long. You know, I think that's part of the thing. It's not like she like goes on a bender and then kind of sees Jesus. You know, it's like she goes on a bender and then goes on another bender because she's a 17-year-old girl. She's so lost. Everyone is dying around her.
Right. There's a desensitization to everybody dying around her. And of course, you know, Charlie hits home the most, but she knew everyone that was dying.
And also I think just for her, just being like, I'm going to like, just the terror of I'm probably going to die
right
at any moment. You know, I told someone this, but, you know, like her going under the bed is inspired by my dog because my dog's like the breed of dog that likes to like wedge themselves into tight spaces. And the reason they do that, like just throughout history, is because a predator can't flip them over. So it's like the safest place an animal can be to rest is like squished. And I was like, oh, I really like that. Like, let's have her be like, I'm just going to squish myself into like as tight of a container as possible to like preserve myself basically. And so it was like that was, you know, part of what drew me to it was that idea of like you're kind of spending an hour in one movie and then you take a pretty mean turn, and then you're following this girl kind of through hell. And then even at the end of the movie, she's not, you know, she's better, but she's not fine. Like, you know, it was important. Like, oh, this was always written that way, but like the first shot and the last shot are pretty similar shots.
And
she's engaging again, which is what
She's
we needed to
engaging
see,
again,
because she
and
drops out for most of the, like a long time on that drinking bender. You brought it up. You brought it up earlier a second ago. Dylan's mom. I'm just curious about how much screen time you decided to give her. It is a strange intro. I say this respectfully. It's the only slight glitch in the matrix. She's like sitting in this graveyard late at night. Some old lady walks up. It's like, hi, I'm Dylan's mom. Like, we're both out here late at night. And I understand it thematically that they were both thinking of Dylan. They're visiting him late at night. But it was like wow, I did not see that coming. Now, her scenes ended up to go really well. But I'm just curious about your decision to kind of go there and to give that much screen time to it. Because, she inspires her a little. So tell me about that.
Yeah, it felt to me like, and she's in the movie before that too, kind of backgrounded. And she's such a wonderful actor. And it felt to me like everyone everyone Mara knows in the movie is they don't get it. Like, they get it, but she can't talk. Like, she can't talk to Tess about it. She can't talk to her parents about it. All the other students, can't talk about it in that way that she kind of needs. And, it was like, oh, like, who is the person that what's happened fucks up more than Catherine? And it was like, oh, it should be his mom. And especially because, he brings up before, like, his dad is dead. So, like, his mom is now completely alone. And it just felt like having, I always wanted it, like, it's not part of the book, but I always wanted it to be this thing where this person who has gone through hell herself and is going through hell herself can kind of reach out and take care of this girl. And kind of in doing so, Catherine can kind of see, like, oh, like, we have to take care of each other. Like, this woman does not need to, like, look out for me in this moment. Like, it's a very, like, not like a religious godly thing she's doing, but, like, she's doing, like, such a service to this girl who doesn't need it done. And it was like, again, like, it was the kind of thing where she had scenes that we didn't wind up shooting, again, because of the schedule and the budget. And I think the movie would have been better with them. But I like the fact that, it just is like this. She's a stranger to this person, and I think getting to the part of the movie where Catherine is comforting her by the end of the scene, that kind of felt to me like putting, like, Catherine kind of starting to get back on track a little bit, was kind of being like, because she is very self-centered in the movie. And I think it takes a while for her to be like, everyone is broken kind of right now. And this woman is in way more pain than I could understand.
Well, it helps to put it in perspective, obviously. So, I mean, it definitely works in that position, because it's a mother that lost a daughter. So they both, had a loss that was like, has a similarity.
So they felt and like, and I wish that the graveyard was we shot that in 3 different locations because we kept getting snowed out. So, like, I don't even have like her walking into the graveyard is like her on the football field from, like, the football scene. Like, it's such a ghetto.
You know what? It looked great. Like,
it wasn't like she almost played, like, Shayla's intro kind of almost plays a little ghosty. And it wasn't, like, always the intention, but that was what wound up happening. Cause even, like, her close-ups in, anytime Shayla talks in the scene she's in a warehouse. And same with Catherine. And then, so we just have, like, kind of like those 2 wide exteriors. And that's kind of, I think, and then when Catherine lays down is in the actual graveyard, and then we just got blizzarded out.
That makes sense.
But it's like one of those things. Like, I'm like, I wish, like, I remember, like, we had, like, a scene where, like, when Dylan realizes that the kids exploded in the Jeep, like, he was at home, and, like, you kind of meet her. And there was another scene where, like, Mara goes over to Dylan's house and Shayla was there, and they kind of have, like, a small, like, little moment. And then it was just like, we tried to figure out how to shoot it in Catherine's house and just kind of, like, reset it, like, to make it look different enough of a house. And it just became too hard and too time prohibitive. And so, it was just part of it, because I think we shot 150 scenes. And I think, the hope was it was going to be like 180 scenes. And so, we lost 30 scenes kind of right before shooting. And so things fall to the wayside, and it's, a bummer, but I don't know.
And that was all because of weather? All 30 of those scenes?
Oh, and like, budgets and
budget time,
all that kind of stuff. And just knowing time-wise, as you're losing days, you're like,
yeah.
And some of it too is just like, oh, I really want to spend a good amount of time on the Shayla and Catherine graveyard scene, as opposed to giving that 20 minutes. And so a lot of it was, it's like, what are your Sophie's choices kind of thing where you're like, I can tell the story without some scenes and it might not be as good, but also I can tell some scenes in 5 minutes and I need 5 hours to tell other scenes. And so it's a lot of that give and take. I think that's just like that indie movie world, it's like, I don't think anyone has different, maybe they don't have like the studio imploding side of things, but like, everyone goes through the weather and budgets and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not a unique case study in that.
Well, your transitions were great. Kind of going back to our conversation earlier with the stuff that you liked hearing Gagan say in his podcast for Syriana. And, one of them that caught me that just like is a great example that is something that is clearly scripted was a character says, let's hope for the best. And then the cut is, let's prepare for the worst.
Yeah.
And it's like, how important is getting those on the page? Because I thought the editing in the movie was really good. You did have a lot of stuff going on with voiceover, so you kept a great pace going. But I really did admire a lot of the transitions that were on the page. So tell us at what point in your writing process that happens. Is it kind of like the icing on the cake once the cake is actually baked?
No, that's like an ingredient from the get-go, and especially on Spontaneous, because there's no plot. Like there's no forward drive of the movie. And so like when people are like, oh, it's so energetic and everything, like there's not, like, the reason is because of the editing and transitions and like everything we're doing to kind of simulate momentum. But Catherine doesn't make that many choices. Like the whole movie is about things happening to you and how you can't stop it. Yeah. And so it feels weird if Catherine's, bringing out a magnifying glass and like trying to solve what's going on. And so a lot of that was like knowing, like, I want it to feel as much like a studio. Because I think part of, for me, like the joke is the wrong word, but like there's like the indie A24, kind of more stoner version of the movie.
Right.
But I was like, I really want it to feel like a John Hughes, like a studio movie. And then we're just covering everyone in blood and then talking about death the whole time. So that was like part of it, like wanting it to feel really poppy and fun.
But so since you don't outline, you have a general sense of where your scenes are going, I would assume that this is kind of like a second draft thing in which you could see the connections, the transitions, or do you get it the first time?
Yeah, I think some of them maybe are later, but like a lot of them are. I'm trying to think, like the one of Jed turning around, like when Jed's talking about why he liked Caitlin Ogden, and then turns around, like that was definitely like right off the bat in the script. And the one you mentioned, I think, was right off the bat in the script too.
That's great.
And again, it was just, especially in that area, where again, it's like that zone of everyone knows it's not over as an audience. Like it's too early for the popping to be over. But it's also the kind of thing where it's like, you kind of want to play with that. Like, is it going to be this scene? Is it going to be this scene? And you don't want it to feel too wayward. Like we're just like random scenes kind of thing. And so like, I think having transitions in there helps a lot, where you're kind of like, I don't know where this is going. There's no plot. Like they're just all kind of like hanging out and getting back to their normal lives. Like when Catherine is in bed with Charlie and he's like, we're going back to school. And she's like, what? And he's like, you didn't hear. And like, it cuts to her going like, no, like that was scripted right away. And it was just that kind of thing where it was just like wanting you to, it's a weird, thankfully the studio just wasn't really involved in the movie because they would have hated hearing it. But like, I wanted people to get like a little itchy in their seats where they're kind of like, I don't know where this is. You kind of want them to get a little like, where's this going? And then you hit them with the explosion and you're kind of like, oh shit, like I need to snap back into the movie. And then you're kind of like, why did I ever want this to come back? Like, this is awful. This is a terrible thing that I missed. And so like playing with that, boredom part of it felt really realistic and fun to me. But then putting in those transitions, so you're kind of like, I don't know where this is going, but like clearly they knew where this is going. Like it's planned out from the get-go where there's transitions that are absolutely scripted. It's not like quirky editing. It's
no, of course.
Yeah. And so that felt like a way to be like, we are going to take a little too long to play with the tension of when this is going to come back. But I'm not just like dropping scenes left and right. Like these are all like carefully thought out kind of things that we're doing. And like transitions is just I think a nice subconscious way for people to kind of be like, someone knows, like there's a plan at place. I'm not just watching like, random puzzle pieces get thrown in the air and then like jammed down by like a toddler. It's like, there's a methodology with these transitions that are guiding us into where we're going. And so I think it gives an audience a little bit of confidence in the story, but then also it was just, again, us trying to, I think it does create pacing just inherently.
Absolutely.
And that was an important thing in the movie where it was just like, and especially knowing we were going to slow down a bunch in the third act, but it being like, okay, like, have people not realize there's no plot as much as possible. Like I saw there's one tweeter who was just like, oh, Catherine's so passive. And I was just like, that's the point, man. Like, that's like exactly that's like the nightmare of the movie is like there's nothing she can do. And so she's just kind of like bopping around in her life, drinking herself to oblivion until she's basically like, oh, like I can't stop myself from dying, but like I can do
better in my life.
Yeah.
What was something in editing that was a big lesson? Like, obviously we talked earlier about a deleted scene. Was there anything else that you hated to cut, or was a big lesson that, you wish you had this coverage, or something like if you.
I mean, it's like I think it's always like, I'm definitely the kind of person that like, it's all hell to me. Like, it's like, I was talking to Dan Trachtenberg, who helped a lot on the car scene actually, because he's a Temple University buddy of mine. And he directed 10 Cloverfield Lane, and he mentioned to me, he's the best. And he mentioned to me, it was like, it's so hard because your movie never looks like a movie to you when you're looking at it. And like, I found that very true. Where I'm like looking at it, I'm like, what did I shoot this? Like, I don't understand what I'm looking at half the time. And there's definitely stuff I hated to lose. But I think it was all, it all had to go. Like there won't be like a director's cut or anything. And I think the thing on this one was the tone, and I knew this in prepping and shooting but really hammering home in post is, the even like the inflections of a line read can go so far into making people think, Catherine is a psychopath and she doesn't care about any of these kids dying, or like, oh, she cares. And, there's an emotional undercurrent. And so much of that is just like, using what Catherine gave us, or like what any of the characters gave us. But I think especially on a movie that's so tonally specific, that we could really shape how things felt, just based on like changing a line, or even like ADRing a couple lines here and there, where it was just like, having an actor go a little softer, it just made like a massive difference. And it's the same line, same scene, saying everything, but even just guiding you into the next scene, it would be like, oh, like again, it's like that confidence and that pacing that you could really control with just a line delivery kind of thing. So that was, that was great, awesome. Because, I'm not allowed in the edit as a writer usually.
Right. I mean, it would be a different experience, obviously. The ending was great. And her moment of inspiration where she becomes active, right, after being passive, and she decides to take, her life into her own hands, was this incredible montage where you're just going off the rails. You're having the monkeys type Shakespeare. You're having the dinosaurs with the comments. Were you the voice of one of the dinosaurs, by the way?
Yeah.
I knew it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I'm in the movie 4 or 5 times, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm all over it. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was awesome that you were one of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I'm all over because sometimes we just didn't have enough extras, and I was just like, it looks weird, and I would like run in, and it's like the back of my head or something.
So, well, I know you're a big Jurassic Park fan, so I know that you being the voice of one of the dinosaurs is a dream.
Yeah, and that even just came out of wanting to like make the movie as if Charlie was making the movie in terms of his life philosophy, where you're kind of like, oh, this, and I haven't made a movie since, so like it could be the only movie I make. And so it was like, what is everything I can put in the movie that I'm like, well, I got a dinosaur in there. And it was just, it came out of that, where it was just kind of like,
what gave you the idea for that sequence? Like, based on how the book ends, because it was very creative and I liked it a lot.
The book ends darker and sadder for sure.
What happens briefly?
It's kind of right after prom, and I'm trying to remember. Mara beats up Rossetti because she finds out that Rossetti got fired like months ago, and that Rossetti's just been lurking. And I was like, I'm not going to beat up Rossetti. And then she's like sitting in the rain with Tess, kind of like the swing set scene, but like at the end, and Tess is like, I'm going to leave. I need my life to start. And they fall asleep in the rain, and it's suggested that Tess might have died overnight, kind of in the rain. And it's like one of those like, did Tess leave?
How's it suggested?
It's like she leaves some clothes behind, and Mara's like, I don't know if she exploded and these clothes are just soaked with rain, or if she exploded, or she just left town basically. And then it kind of has like a similar, not as full force of an ending as ours, but kind of has like I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but that kind of ending. And then for me, I knew she was going to get the truck, which I can't remember if that's from the book or not. And I knew she had to leave town because that felt like, the story is over. And then, again, like using that, she's doing voiceover. Her voiceover is a little off kilter sometimes. Like she's kind of grumbly sometimes. And then it just felt funny if instead of, and again, like I really wanted to kind of try to hit all of the YA tropes that I could, just because I like playing with genre, and it's like, I feels weird if you don't have pop songs in your prom and like all that kind of stuff. And so it felt like there's a lot of those movies that wrap up with like the inspirational, here we go life kind of. It's a lot of like poetry quotations and whatnot. And it felt really funny that if like Catherine was, if you pictured Mara like in a recording booth telling this story, like it felt like, what is the way to show like Catherine is reclaiming herself, and kind of choosing to be like a Catherine 2.0, to its like fullest extent. And it was just like, oh, she should just like look at the script and hate the script, and just be like, the script is bullshit. Like, I hate it. I'm just going to start screaming and acting like a lunatic in like the recording booth. And then that was kind of like the thought process, where she was just like, she's just going to swear a lot and say a lot of nonsense, and just like, it just goes off the rails. But it kind of felt like a way where you're like, oh, like our teenage girl has grown up a lot and she's learned a lot, but she's really working hard to not let what she's learned ruin her. And so it felt like a fun way to kind of do your tropey YA ending, but just doing it in a way where you have your lead girl screaming, "Suck my dick," like while seeing dinosaurs and monkeys typewriting, and she's in a sinkhole and all these different things. And so, and then you have like the Sufjan song going too. And so it felt like, kind of wanting to make it as messy as possible, as if she was just like, kind of the first act Catherine a little bit more. But yeah, and then it felt like, again, like something I talked to with the author a lot, where I was just like, I can't kill 40 people and the nicest boy that ever lived, and then her best friend, and then end. Like, people are just going to be miserable. And again, like wanting it to feel like we snuck in a movie about coping with grief into like a studio, like even though we were in indie, but like into like a studio YA movie felt really funny to me. Like part of like a weird joke that probably only I would get, but it was like, okay, so like let's take like a YA ending and then how do we just bastardize it with Catherine and make it ours, but you're also like, it's a YA ending. Like all the things that are in a YA ending are there. But it's also her screaming and going crazy and off the rails and just being like, we're all gonna die. Like it's, you know, the last like 6 minutes of the movie is just, you know, people chanting we're all gonna die over and over. And it's like, but then you leave and you feel good. And like it felt like a really bizarre kind of note to end on where she's screaming, suck my dick, like I'm gonna live an amazing life as long as I can. Sufjan's singing we're all gonna die. There's dinosaurs. And then it ends and you're kind of like, oh, our girl has come a long way. So you
it was a great sequence. Yeah,
Cool,
it was a great sequence. Well, what was your toughest scene as a writer and as a director? What was the scene on the page that kept you coming back to it again and again? And how did you creatively solve the challenge? And same thing as you as a director on set, but obviously writing first.
I'll do directing first.
Okay.
But the directing first was the graveyard was awful because of weather. But we got it right in the edit really fast, but it was based on what we had. But that was hard because it was like we were out of days and we were just trying to figure out how to shoot the scene as much as we could. So that was stressful. And then directing in post and the car scene was really hard just because, again, it was this thing of like, you're like, okay, like you have this idea and now do it in half the time. But there's a lot of movement in the scene where you're kind of like, okay, so like how much, you know, how can I get Catherine from the back seat to the front seat in one shot, even though I was planning on 3, you know, it's a lot of that kind of stuff. So that was the directing side. And the writing side, I think, was honestly the cocktail scene. Because I knew, even when I read the book,
Which one?
It's when it's right after Charlie dies when Catherine's making a cocktail for her dad.
Yes.
And it was like, I knew really fast that like I was going to go, like you weren't going to see Charlie explode. You were just going to go straight to like a red screen. And then you kind of deal with like the immediate aftermath of Charlie dying. And then it was kind of like, okay, but then the movie, you know, we're an hour into the movie at that point. Like we need to reset the whole movie basically. And we also have to reset it in a way where people aren't going to be like, I hate this. It's so depressing. But also in a way where we're like, things are terrible. Like things are not good. And so I came up with the cocktail scene, I think because honestly, I drink a lot. But also because we talked about the movie a lot. Like when I would talk about the movie, I was like, it's like a cocktail. It's like this really weird, there's a lot of things that are going into it. And like, you probably don't think they all go together, but if you do it right, you're like, that's a tasty beverage. And I remember thinking,
that's a tasty beverage. It should have been your marketing campaign. I like it.
I know, but I remember thinking like, I was like, I need Catherine to break the fourth wall and like look at us and kind of be like a little meta, but just kind of be like, all right, like, so that like, we're going to keep going. But also like, what's the version of, again, where we're having like fun and we're kind of resetting the movie. And then we're kind of learning like, oh, this is bad. Like this is bad. Like everything is bad. But we're also like not miserable. And I felt like the cocktail scene, I can't remember when I came up with it, but I remember that was the one that gave me the most stress. Cause I was like, once I get through being back in the movie, like it kind of, you know, the wheels are back on the car. If people forgive me for killing Charlie. And that was the one where I was like, you know, okay, so I know she's going to be drinking a lot. So like, okay, let's just go all in and have her make a cocktail and have it be bloody and ridiculous and silly
and in front of her dad.
And then you're like, oh, and the reveal is that she's not breaking the fourth wall. She's talking to Rob, her dad. And then Rob just being like, how do I deal with the daughter whose boyfriend just died and whose 40 classmates have just died and she's probably going to die. Like, how do I just tell her not to drink? Like, what do I do? And then being like, and then you see Catherine like down it and you're kind of like, haha, it's funny. She's drinking. And then, you know, the next scene, you're like, she's still drinking, and then she's still drinking, and
Well, and then her friend says, like, it's time to move on, because the rest of her friends are kind of trying to move on and be their best selves. So
yeah, like
you're seeing that ascension in the background as well.
Yeah, like with Tess, it was like, again, it's like those things of like knowing that she has to like break up with Tess to some extent, like basically break up with everybody because she's just so self-destructive, and having Tess say like, you're, regarding like the drinking and everything, it's just like you're trying so hard not to exist. So like when you stop existing, it's like it's not that big of a deal because you're just so blitzed out that you're like, oh, and then I died, like I didn't even notice, kind of thing. And so it felt like that again, like you're trying to have fun on like one level because you're still kind of trying to drag the audience along into like this movie where you're like, things are not great, like we're going to talk about some existential heavy stuff. Like I don't want it to be 30 minutes of Catherine crying either. And so, figuring, but like the cocktail scene, it really felt like the kind of thing where, like once I kind of got that, I felt like that summed up the tone of the movie really well. Joe Trapanese had the great idea, who is our composer, of just almost using, it's very similar to the opening music of the movie because it really is like a weird reset. And that on the page, I was like, if I get this wrong, like people are just going to leave, or they're just going to be like, oh, I have to sit here for like another 30 minutes. Like, why did he die like 5 minutes from the end? Like every other, sappy YA thing. And then, so that was the toughest to write in terms of, I just couldn't figure out what the scene was. And then once I figured it out, it was really fun to write.
You did it well. I mean,
that was the one that stressed me out the most.
It worked for sure.
And everything, a lot of the other touchstones are either from the book or I knew really on, but like, because I don't outline, I was like, well, Charlie dies here. And then I had a lot of scenes that I knew I was going to do, but it was like, what is that handoff between Charlie dying and us kind of coming back? So that was the writing one that I was just like, oh, this is a nightmare. And then I'm really stoked about it. So
it definitely worked. What's next? What are you working on next? I know Vivian hasn't been herself lately is something that you've been working on. What's the status on that? What's the brief pitch?
The pitch is I don't think that'll be next. But the pitch of it is it's about a married couple where the wife gets possessed, and then everything that happens in The Exorcist happens in the first 5 minutes of the movie and fails, and then it's basically Blue Valentine with a man and a demon.
That's
for
funny.
Like the whole movie. Like the really dumb pitch is it's kind of like if Batman and the Joker were married and Batman refused to walk out on the Joker. And so it's just this crazy character trying to destroy her husband and having like a great time doing it. And we almost made it before Spontaneous. And then we had a great actress and she got pulled for like reshoots in our window. It was just like, one of those things that happens. But I'd like to get back to it someday.
Is it set up somewhere in particular?
No, I own it.
Okay, great.
But it's just I don't know when that will happen. I don't think it will be next. Because I think I really want to do, and not that that's similar to Spontaneous, like it's a lot darker, but I want to make sure whatever I do is as 180 from Spontaneous as possible, just to keep it challenging and make myself miserable. So I'm working on a movie that has no dialogue, that I think, knock on wood, will be next if COVID doesn't derail it again. And then I have another thing that's another relationship, like a very dark relationship drama, that we just started sending out to places and trying to set up, but it's very.
Does it have a title?
Yes, I don't think I can say.
Okay. What about the no dialogue movie?
That one's called No One Will Save You.
Okay.
And that's a one-hander that I was like, well, what's the most complicated character I can make in a movie that has no dialogue, and then we'll just, throw everything at them kind of thing. So we've cast it a couple times, and then, with the Rona, it's been really challenging to kind of lock down dates and everything. So we're in the middle of trying to cast it again and trying to figure out like when we can actually shoot. And then I'm producing, knock on wood, a movie with Lord and Miller at Universal. That's an untitled bear horror comedy that a buddy of mine who was McGee's assistant on The Babysitter wrote, and I set up at Universal with Aditya and Chris and Phil.
A bear horror movie, like Grizzly Man Bear, like an actual bear?
Yeah, it has a title, but Universal really wants to keep the title secret. But because once you hear the title, you're like, oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The hope is that will go soon, and we just got a great director, and we're.
Oh, so you're not going to direct it?
No, yeah, it was it was Jimmy's script, and I helped with it a little, and I just felt like the budget of that one's 40 or so, and I felt like I wanted to have like an intermediary step, because I want to as much as I can earn movie money. I want to earn like the budgets I have that I feel like, oh, I'm responsible for 15 million, and
no, that's great.
15 and build up, and but I like the smaller. I Spontaneous was a bitch, but I like the smaller space too, where I can do my weird things, and there's not a ton of risk, as
That's
opposed
awesome.
to some of those bigger things where I'm like, that seems like a lot of, I don't care about Spontaneous's box office, because I'm like, they'll make their money, as opposed to like a bigger movie. I'm like, I don't even know if there's going to be theaters in a year.
I hope there are, but unless
I'm more nervous about that.
yeah, I mean, like we're gonna need a kind of government bailout on a lot of industries, and movie theaters are no different.
It's gonna be bad.
The way it works is the theater chains are paying rent, sometimes to themselves, sometimes to other entities, and can the people that own the spaces of the movie theaters give rent relief without having to pay their property taxes on that property with no income coming in? So it's so complicated
I think that theaters are kind of going to be tied, because I don't think Tenet worked, or the experiment.
We know it didn't in America, at least, and so it's like
I think the theater chains are going to be really tied to the vaccine working and making people feel confident. Because I think when the doors are open and you feel safe, I think they're going to make so much money.
Yeah, it's going to take a while though, because until people could mask up and properly social distance and stuff like that, we're going to keep seeing the graph go up and down with outbreaks. Yeah. And we're the only country in the world right now that has this many cases and this many deaths, and it's only because somehow masking up has become a political issue rather than a common sense safety issue like a seatbelt. So it's really just
my political
crazy.
Everyone in the world that watches Spontaneous knows exactly how I feel politically.
Yeah.
So I think, but I do think there's a direct correlation between who wins the election and when audiences go back to theaters.
Me too, for sure.
So that's I would like the right person to win.
Me too.
Just Joe Biden.
I am hoping. I'm making calls for Joe Biden every single day. I'm talking to voters in battleground states every single day. I'm sending texts.
But I think it's gonna take people, because I know like the theater owners are angry at studios, and I'm just kind of like, it's not the content. It really is people.
Oh yeah. When James Bond was pulled, people were like all mad at the movie James Bond. I'm like, are you kidding me? Get mad at the actual fact that we don't have a national mask mandate. And we don't have low numbers like Taiwan or Japan or New Zealand, because
it's funny. Like
to mask up.
Spontaneous is as a New Zealander, and he's shooting the Lord of the Rings show now, and like I'll FaceTime him, and he's just like walking around, living his life.
Yeah.
Like an asshole would do here, but like over there, it's just like, that's why can't you walk around and high five and hug and all these things? And you're just like, oh, this is. I need to move to New Zealand.
We're going to have, by the way, I think there's a travel embargo on Americans coming to New Zealand anyhow.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
You would have to quarantine for a minimum 2 weeks just to land because of the outbreak in this country. So, I mean, Look, it's going to be a crazy couple weeks.
Yeah.
I loved your film, though. Getting back to the film, I hope that
Thank
you
you.
and I will be able to go into a movie theater together and have a Q&A screening one day as
Yeah.
well. And so,
Yeah, I've never seen it with an audience.
Yeah.
So it's, kind of this
you know
weird
what? If we
thing.
could get through this damn pandemic and get back into theaters, that'll be something that you and I hopefully will put together, because that would be fun.
Sure.
It won't be a monster 2-hour episode of a podcast like this, but we should get it up in front of people and do a Q&A if we can.
Sounds good.
So,
I'd love that. Yeah.
yeah, but congrats on your first film, man, and thanks for
Thank
being so
you.
generous with your time, and I can't wait to see what you do next. So thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, man. Have a good one.
You too, buddy. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Brian Duffield for being so generous with his time. This was such a fun, long episode to do, and I really appreciated Brian just being there for all of it. So thanks again for that, Brian. And if you have not yet seen Spontaneous, I highly recommend you go rent it. You could find it anywhere where you could find movies to rent, and it's great to support independent filmmakers during a time like this as well. So please go search out Spontaneous. And of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine as well over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, and we would greatly appreciate your support. In fact, you could use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off your subscription at backstory.net. So there's tons of reasons to support us, and I hope you could find one of them, especially after reading our free issue over there. If that doesn't convince you, I don't know what would. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. If you want to find me on social media, you could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or on Instagram. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.